Hey guys, today we embark on a journey that, if you were living just a few thousand years ago, would probably involve you getting hopelessly, tragically lost. Imagine, if you will, waking up in a primordial forest, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and unseen blossoms. Sunlight, a liquid gold, filters through the dense canopy, dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns. You blink, disoriented, the chirping of unseen insects your only soundtrack. No phone, no GPS, not even a compass. Just you, the whispering trees, and a vague, gnawing sensation in your stomach that suggests breakfast is long overdue. Now, try to find your way back to that slightly less threatening clearing, where you think your tribe might have left some half-eaten mammoth ribs. You wouldn't survive, would you? Probably not, but our ancestors did, and they started by looking up. Way up at the sky at the most reliable clock and compass they had, the sun. You see, for countless millennia, before anyone even dreamed of mapping the stars or inventing a magnetic needle, you lived by the rhythm of the sun. Every single day, without fail, that blazing orb would heave itself above the eastern horizon, paint the sky with glorious oranges and purples, and begin its slow, majestic arc across the heavens. You'd watch it, perhaps with a slight squint, as it climbed higher, shrinking your shadow beneath your feet until it almost vanished at what you instinctively knew was the middle of the day. Then it would begin its descent, casting your shadow longer and longer, stretching out ahead of you as it dipped towards the western edge of your world, eventually winking out of sight, leaving you in the cool embrace of twilight. This daily performance wasn't just a pretty light show. It was your very first lesson in orientation. You didn't need a lecture, no ancient professor with a pointed stick drawing diagrams in the dirt. You just needed to exist. You'd notice, perhaps while foraging for berries or tracking a nimble rabbit, that the sun always rose in roughly the same direction. Your tribe, your village, your favorite napping spot by the river, they were always that way from the sunrise. And the direction the sun vanished each evening, that was the other way. Congratulations, you've just grasped east and west, even if you didn't have names for them yet. Maybe you just called them sun-up place and sundown place, which honestly is far more descriptive. But directions aren't just a line. They're a whole circle, aren't they? And that's where your own shadow became your personal directional divining rod. As the sun climbed from sun-up place, your shadow would stretch long behind you, pointing towards sundown place. A mainstream historical fact here is that early humans, through generations of keen observation, absolutely relied on the sun's consistent movement and the corresponding changes in shadow length and direction to navigate. They didn't just notice it, they built their lives around it. Imagine trying to hunt, following tracks through dense undergrowth, but always knowing that if you kept the sun on your left in the morning, you were generally heading north. Or if you needed to head back to camp, you simply waited until your shadow pointed the way home. A silent, elongated arrow indicating your path. The most crucial moment, though, was midday, when the sun reached its highest point in the sky, or close enough for practical purposes, your shadow would be at its shortest. And in the northern hemisphere, where many of these early insights likely crystallized, that stubby shadow would consistently point north. This wasn't some complex astronomical calculation. It was simply what happened. It was a reliable, repeatable phenomenon. You could take a stick, any old stick, perhaps one you just finished using to scratch a particularly itchy mosquito bite, stick it upright in the ground, and watch its tiny shadow. That tiny shadow, pointing steadfastly in one direction at noon, became your original north arrow. This simple, upright stick, known later as a gnomon, became the world's first rudimentary sundial, not for telling time with precision, but for fixing a direction. It was genius in its raw, unfiltered simplicity. Historians still argue whether early nomadic tribes consciously conceptualized north as a cardinal direction, or if it was more of an intuitive, practical understanding derived from this daily observation. Was it a label, or just a deeply ingrained, that way at midday feeling? This deep connection to the sun's path wasn't just about practical navigation, though. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some archaeologists suggest that the alignment of megalithic structures like Stonehenge, precisely marking solstices and equinoxes, didn't just showcase advanced astronomical knowledge, but also reinforced a spiritual or ritualistic understanding of these cardinal points. Imagine the awe, the reverence, as the sun's first rays on the longest day of the year pierced a specific stone lintel, illuminating an inner chamber. You wouldn't just be seeing the sunrise. You'd be witnessing a sacred confirmation of your place in the cosmos, a celestial compass guiding not just your movements on Earth, but your spiritual journey, too. It certainly beats trying to find your car in a packed shopping mall car park. And yes, you'd even notice how the sun's path changed subtly throughout the year. In winter, it seemed to hug the southern horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows even at noon. In summer, it soared almost directly overhead, making those midday shadows practically disappear. This annual dance, too, became part of your mental map, helping you gauge not just direction, but even the changing seasons, which was pretty handy for knowing when to gather certain plants or when the migrating herds would arrive. It was all so wonderfully organic, so tied to the land beneath your feet and the sky above your head. You didn't need a complicated algorithm. You just needed to open your eyes and pay attention. And perhaps a slight aversion to getting lost and becoming dinner for a saber-toothed cat. It added a certain frisson to your daily observations, didn't it? You learned, through sheer repetition and the gentle, insistent nudges of survival, that east was where the new day dawned, west where it faded into memory. North was often that way, when the sun was highest, and south, naturally, was the opposite, often associated with the sun's warmer, higher arc in the sky for those living north of the equator. You absorbed these lessons not from a blackboard, but from the warmth on your skin, the cool brush of a shadow, the dampness of morning dew, and the rustling whispers of the wind. Your body became your compass, your eyes your sextant, all calibrated by the most ancient of celestial guides. Consider the sheer mental mapping involved. You didn't just know east. You knew the forest where the sweet roots grow is east of the river, which is south of the big rock. And if I keep the rising sun on my right, I'll eventually hit the clearing. It was a living, breathing, three-dimensional map in your head, constantly updated by the sun's daily march. It was effective, too, allowing you to venture further from your familiar hunting grounds, to find new resources, to follow game migrations, all without once uttering, "Are we there yet?" And frankly, who needs a complex array of modern tech when you have a perfectly good stick and a bright sky? It's almost a little smug, isn't it, how simple they made it look. The moon hangs like a pail, knowing eye above you, casting long, distorted shadows that twist familiar trees into menacing figures. The chill of the night air bites at your exposed skin, and the comforting warmth of yesterday's sun is a distant memory. Above, the sky is a sprawling canvas, pinpricked with countless diamonds, each one a tiny, distant sun. You squint, trying to make sense of the swirling patterns, feeling that primal tremor of being utterly, terrifyingly lost. Remember how simple things felt when the sun was painting clear directions across the ground. Well, buckle up, Because the night offers a whole new level of you probably won't survive this if you don't crack its code. Your GPS, your phone signal, non-existent, your trusty compass, centuries away from existing. Right now, it's just you, the vast, cold expanse, and a sky full of glittering potential or terrifying confusion. The trick, you quickly realize, is that while the sun is a faithful, if somewhat predictable, daily guide, it vanishes. And when it's gone, you need something else, something equally steadfast but always there, lurking behind the blue veil of day. That's where your celestial companions, the stars, step in. Unlike the fleeting sun, many stars seem to hold their ground, or at least move with a grand, stately rhythm that's far less erratic than your own panicked wanderings. You spend nights, perhaps huddled by a dying fire, tracing paths with your finger in the dust, mimicking the slow, majestic sweep of the constellations overhead. You learn, slowly, intuitively, that some stars appear to stay put, as if nailed to the sky's vast dome, while others wheel around them in majestic, sweeping arcs. This observation is foundational. In the northern hemisphere, your ancestors, and now you, would eventually spot it. A star that barely budges. It's not the brightest, not the flashiest, but it's utterly dependable. We call it Polaris, the North Star. For millennia, this steadfast beacon has served as the anchor of the northern sky, its position marking true north with uncanny precision. Imagine the eureka moment. After days of tracking the sun, you realize that if you can just find that one unwavering point in the night sky, you've locked down a cardinal direction. From there, everything else falls into place, like dominoes. If that's north, then east is to your right, west to your left, and south, well, that's behind you. Simple, right? Until you try it in the pitch black with only the light of a distant supernova to guide you. In the southern hemisphere, the challenge was subtly different. There's no single bright pole star. Instead, navigators would rely on asterisms like the Southern Cross or Crux, and its two-pointer stars, Alpha and Beta Centauri, to locate the celestial South Pole. It's like a cosmic scavenger hunt, but with significantly higher stakes than finding your car keys in the dark. These patterns, once recognized, become your steady hand in the vast ocean of night. And speaking of patterns, that's where constellations really shine. Who decided that a random cluster of stars looked exactly like a bear, or a hunter, or a cosmic teapot? Probably someone who'd spent a lot of time alone under the stars, maybe a little too much time. But regardless of their whimsical origins, these stellar groupings became crucial landmarks. They were not just pretty pictures. They were giant, glowing arrows in the sky, pointing the way. You start to recognize familiar shapes. The Big Dipper or Ursa Major isn't just a fancy ladle. Its two-pointer stars reliably guide you to Polaris. Orion, with his distinctive belt, not only signals the approach of winter in many parts of the world, but also acts as a directional cue. You notice how these constellations don't just sit there. They march across the sky over the course of a night, and they shift their positions slightly with the changing seasons. This cosmic dance, seemingly chaotic at first, reveals an underlying order. The way a particular star rises over a specific mountain peak at a certain time of year becomes a kind of calendar and a compass rolled into one. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient cultures across the globe, from the Egyptians tracking the heliacal rising of Sirius to predict the Nile's flood, to the Polynesian navigators mastering wayfinding across vast oceans using star compasses, relied profoundly on this deep understanding of celestial mechanics. This knowledge wasn't merely academic, it was survival. If you're leading your tribe across a featureless desert, or steering a fragile canoe across an endless ocean, the stars are your only hope. You learn to read the sky like a book, predicting changes in weather, the time of night, and most importantly, your bearing. A fascinating, perhaps quirky, tidbit from ancient astronomy is the practice of star paths or star roads in some indigenous cultures. Rather than focusing solely on fixed constellations, they map the apparent paths of specific stars from their rising point to their setting point, seeing them as direct lines or roads across the sky that led to specific destinations. It's like having a celestial railway system, only the trains are made of pure light. The rhythm of the cosmos becomes your second nature. You wake up at the precise moment a certain star touches the horizon, knowing it's time to pack up camp. You adjust your course in the middle of the night because the constellation you're following has drifted too far to the west. This deep, embodied knowledge, passed down through generations, not just through words, but through countless shared nights under the open sky, transformed bewildering darkness into a navigable map. Historians still argue whether early astronomers, before the advent of sophisticated instruments, fully grasped the concept of the Earth's rotation as the cause of the star's apparent movement, or if they simply observed the patterns as inherent properties of the celestial sphere. Was it a geocentric understanding, or did some intuit a more complex heliocentric model, even if only in a rudimentary way? Regardless, their observational prowess was undeniable. They charted the heavens with incredible accuracy using only their eyes and perhaps simple notched sticks or aligned stones. Think about it. No light pollution, no distractions, just pure, unadulterated stargazing. If you can't tell which way is north by looking at the sky, maybe you just need to get out of the city more often. You begin to appreciate the sheer complexity of it all, yet the elegant simplicity of its application. The stars, once distant, indifferent pinpricks, become personal guides, familiar friends who always know the way home. The chill of the night still bites, but the terror of being lost recedes, replaced by a quiet confidence born of celestial wisdom. You've cracked another part of the cosmic code, transforming the terrifying unknown into a comforting, predictable journey. And with that, your bedtime story for tonight draws to a close, as the stars continue their silent, eternal watch. I've completed Section 3 for you, focusing on wind and water wisdom as requested. To proceed with the next section, please provide the specific topic or bullet point for Section 4 from your overall outline. I need this to ensure I follow your plan precisely and maintain narrative continuity. Natural landmark trails. Early travelers rely on prominent geographical features for route memory. You stand at the edge of a vast, ancient forest, the scent of damp earth and pine needles filling the air. Sunlight, dappled and weak, barely penetrates the thick canopy above, transforming the familiar world into a mosaic of shifting shadows. The path before you isn't paved, isn't even truly a path in the modern sense. It's more of a memory, a whisper carried on the wind, a direction etched into the very landscape by generations of feet. Your muscles ache from days of walking, and the silence here is so profound, you can almost hear the trees growing. You scan the horizon, not for a compass, not for a map, but for the towering, craggy peak in the distance, Old Tooth, your ancestors called it. That peak always to your left tells you you're headed in the right direction, a constant, silent guardian against getting truly, hopelessly lost. This is the very essence of early navigation, an intimate, visceral relationship with the land itself. Forget your fancy GPS or your meticulously folded paper maps. Back then, your map was the world, your compass a distant mountain, a winding river, or even a particularly gnarled old tree that looked suspiciously like a grumpy badger. You were, quite literally, reading the landscape. And let me tell you, if you misread that badger tree, you probably won't survive this. Imagine, for a moment, being an early human, a hunter-gatherer perhaps, venturing further from your established camps than ever before. You're not just looking for food, you're looking for patterns, for repetition. You notice that the river always flows downhill, obviously, but also that its bend always leads you towards a certain valley where the berries are sweetest. Or that the sun, rising over Twin Humps Hill in the morning, sets directly behind sleeping Giant Ridge in the evening, giving you a perfect west-east axis for your return journey. These weren't abstract directions. They were embedded in the very physical features around you. It was like living inside a giant, slow-motion, three-dimensional connect-the-dots game, except the dots were mountains, and the penalty for connecting them wrong was, well, not connecting them at all. This reliance on natural landmarks was fundamental. Early trails weren't built, they evolved. They followed the path of least resistance, yes, but also the path of most recognition. A prominent waterfall, a uniquely shaped rock formation, a deep canyon, these became the signposts of the ancient world. You tell your children, follow the river until you see the whispering stones, then turn towards the place where the sun always touches the dragon's tooth at midday. It was a verbal map, passed down through generations, each story a vital piece of the navigational puzzle. If only they'd had Instagram to share their hiking selfies and tag their locations, right? Just conquered Dragon's Tooth, ancient travel Napinagin hash lost but found. The famous Iroquois Trail, for instance, a vast network stretching across what is now the northeastern United States, wasn't some engineered marvel. It was a compilation of countless smaller paths, woven together over centuries, guided by the Great Lakes, the Appalachian Mountains, and the myriad rivers and streams that crisscrossed the land. These paths were so well-trodden and consistently followed that they often formed the basis for later colonial roads and even modern highways. Think about it. That interstate you drive on might very well be following the exact route some ancient hunter took to avoid a grumpy bear 1,000 years ago. Historians still argue whether the Iroquois purposefully maintained a unified trail system, or if the network simply emerged organically from repeated use and shared knowledge. Beyond the obvious mountains and rivers, even subtler cues played a role. The way a forest edge angled, the specific type of vegetation growing on one side of a ridge but not the other, the sound of a distant waterfall, or even the distinct echoes of a certain valley. All these sensory details accumulated into a rich, internal mental map. It was far more intricate than just go north till you hit the big rock. It was go north till you hit the big rock, then listen for the chattering squirrels on your left, and when the air starts to smell faintly of damp moss and elderberries, you're almost there. It sounds complicated, but for those who lived it, it was intuitive. It was how they survived. One quirky tidbit about this is the concept of wayfinding animals. While not directly a natural landmark, the movements of certain animals were often observed and understood to lead to specific features. Herds of migrating caribou, for example, would follow established routes to water sources or grazing grounds, inadvertently creating and reinforcing human trails. Or birds, flying in certain directions during migration seasons, might indicate the path to warmer climates or abundant food sources. It was like nature's own living, breathing GPS. though considerably less reliable if the animal suddenly decided to take a scenic detour for a particularly tasty patch of clover. The reliability of these natural signposts varied, of course. A towering mountain is a great guide, until a thick fog rolls in, or you realize there are 3 towering mountains that all look similar from a distance. Rivers are dependable until they flood, change course, or you reach a delta where they split into a dozen indistinguishable channels. You couldn't just pull out a map and say, "Oh, I'm here." You had to constantly verify, to triangulate, to adapt. It wasn't a rigid system, but a fluid, adaptive one, honed by generations of trial and error, success and failure. It was less about absolute direction and more about relative position. If the sun is over that peak and the river is there, then home must be that way. This method, while seemingly primitive, fostered an incredible depth of environmental knowledge. People knew their landscape intimately, not just as a backdrop for their lives, but as an active participant in their survival. They understood the nuances of the terrain, the seasonal changes that altered familiar landmarks, the subtle shifts in wind that carried the scent of distant water. It was a level of connection to the earth that most of us, navigating by glowing screens, can barely comprehend. The world was their guide, and they were truly deeply within it. Think of the indigenous peoples of Australia, navigating the vast outback for thousands of years. They didn't have permanent rivers or towering mountain ranges in many areas. Instead, they used songlines, complex oral traditions that encoded the landscape, its features, and the stories associated with them. Each verse of a songline corresponded to a specific landmark or a stretch of the journey, essentially making the song itself a living, breathing map. You'd sing your way across the desert, and as you sang, the land would unfold around you, revealed by the ancient wisdom embedded in the melody. It's an incredible testament to the human capacity for mnemonic navigation, turning an entire continent into a giant, playable tune. Imagine trying to explain that to someone who can't find their way out of a shopping mall without their phone. Just hum the next verse, Brenda. It'll get us to the food court. And while the sun, stars, and winds provided broad directional cues, it was the static, physical landmarks that allowed for precise, localized navigation. You might know north from the stars, but the path to the good hunting grounds required recognizing the twin spruces next to the bubbling spring, or the large rock shaped like a sleeping bear. These weren't abstract concepts. They were concrete, tangible waypoints, each one a silent confirmation that you were still on course, that you hadn't wandered off into the unknown wilderness to become the next cautionary tale. And that, my friend, was a very comforting thought in a world that offered very little comfort if you made a wrong turn. You're still out there, aren't you? Trudging through the dense undergrowth, feeling the sun arc over your head, the ancient stars wheeling above you, a consistent, comforting hum in the cosmic darkness. You've learned to read the wind's whisper, to feel the pull of unseen currents as they guide your raft, to recognize the familiar silhouette of that ancient, gnarled oak that marks the turn to the hidden spring. Your body, your very instincts, have become the most sophisticated navigational tool on the planet. But what happens when you need to tell someone else how to find that spring? What if they're not with you? What if they're miles away, facing their own tangled wilderness? This, my friend, is where the human brain, that glorious, pattern-seeking marvel of yours, decided it needed an upgrade. Not just to know where things were, but to show where things were. Imagine hunkering down by a crackling fire, the smoke curling lazily into the pre-dawn air. You've just discovered a new, incredibly fertile hunting ground, teeming with plump, unsuspecting megafauna. Your kin need to know. You pick up a charred stick or maybe a sharp flint and you begin to scratch. Not just any scratches, mind you. You're sketching. You're drawing. You're translating the three-dimensional world with all its dizzying complexity onto a flat surface. You're not just saying, go towards the big rock anymore. You're saying, go towards the big rock, then turn where the river bends like this. As for that secret berry patch you finally found, without a common language for direction or a way to record it, you'd be pretty much on your own. Good luck finding that secret berry patch before the bears do. Actually, you probably won't survive this if you can't get your directions straight. That's your first reality check. These first maps weren't anything like the meticulously detailed charts you'd fold, or, let's be honest, crumple in your glove compartment today. Forget latitudes and longitudes, forget precise scales and compass roses. These were rough, visceral interpretations, often ephemeral, drawn in the dirt with a finger or a stick, smoothed over by the next gust of wind or the next passing animal. They were the world's first whiteboard presentations, except the whiteboard was the earth itself, and the markers were whatever you could find. A series of pebbles might represent hills, a meandering line of charcoal could be a river. A larger stone, perhaps, that distinctive, easily recognizable peak you've been using as your landmark. Remember that gnarled oak? Now it's just a circle with a few lines radiating out. You're simplifying. You're abstracting. You're thinking about the relationship between places, not just the places themselves. The sheer tactile sensation of dragging your finger through soft earth, creating a miniature landscape, was itself a part of the learning and communication process. You're not just drawing, you're feeling the geography. The beauty of these early attempts lay in their absolute necessity. They weren't art for art's sake, though they surely held an aesthetic appeal. They were survival guides. Here's where we found water. Here's the path the mammoths take. Here's where the grumpy saber-toothed cat usually naps, so maybe go this way instead. Mainstream historical evidence suggests that some of the earliest spatial representations can be found not on separate maps, as we understand them, but integrated into cave paintings themselves. For instance, in places like Lascaux or Altamira, alongside depictions of animals, there are often abstract patterns or lines that some archaeologists interpret as rudimentary representations of the surrounding landscape or hunting territories. It's not a direct map, but shows an awareness of spatial organization and the desire to depict it. Think of it as the original Google Maps, except instead of a satellite, it was a bison. Maybe a very confused bison, but a bison nonetheless. A furry, horn-headed GPS with a surprisingly limited battery life. As human societies grew more complex, so too did the need for more enduring forms of these sketch maps. You couldn't always rely on a sandy canvas. So people started moving their scratchings onto more portable and permanent surfaces. Strips of bark, flattened animal hides, even smoothed pieces of stone or bone became the new canvases. Imagine the patience required to meticulously incise a path onto a piece of bone using only another sharp stone. It's enough to make you appreciate your GPS, isn't it? Just tap, 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 and you're there. No broken flint, no strained wrists, and definitely no risk of your map getting eaten by a hungry badger. These were maps that could travel, maps that could be stored, maps that could be referenced days, weeks, even seasons later. They were the first tangible step towards a shared, collective geographic memory, moving beyond individual lived experience. Now, here's where things get a bit fascinating and a lot less conventional. While many cultures developed similar methods of drawing land-based routes, some maritime societies, particularly in the Pacific, evolved truly unique approaches to mapping. Take the Marshall Islanders, for example. They created what are known as stick charts, or Rebolib and Meadow. These weren't flat drawings of islands, but intricate lattices made of coconut frond midribs, lashed together with plant fibers. The straight sticks represented ocean swells and wave patterns, while cowrie shells or small pieces of coral, lashed to the framework, indicated the positions of islands. Imagine trying to explain that to your navigation app. Siri, please direct me via the third wave pattern past the big shell. You'd probably get a rather snarky response about needing a software update, or perhaps suggest you've entered an incorrect destination. These charts were incredibly sophisticated, representing dynamic oceanographic data rather than static landmasses, and could only be truly interpreted by those who understood their complex mnemonic language. They weren't for showing where to go, but how to go, by understanding the forces of the ocean itself. It's a truly ingenious example of spatial representation, relying on the unseen forces of nature as much as the visible landmarks. This brings us to a point that still sparks lively debate among scholars. Historians still argue whether these earliest spatial representations, be they cave markings or stick charts, should truly be classified as maps in the modern sense, or if they are more accurately described as mnemonic devices, symbolic narratives, or ritualistic diagrams. The discussion often revolves around intent. Were they primarily for navigation and conveying practical geographic information, or did they serve broader social, spiritual, or educational purposes? Did the ancient artists intend to create a precise guide, or were they simply externalizing their cognitive understanding of their environment in a symbolic way, much like a child drawing their house? It's a bit like asking if your hurried sketch of directions to a party, drawn on a napkin, counts as cartography. You'd probably say no, but to the person who needed those directions, it was the most important map in the world at that moment. Regardless of their precise classification, what's clear is that these early sketch maps were a monumental leap in human communication and spatial understanding. You were no longer tethered to your own memory or the need for constant, direct observation. You could outsource your knowledge. You could create a lasting record. This shift from purely experiential navigation to symbolic representation was foundational. It allowed knowledge to be passed down through generations, to be shared across distances, and to be refined over time. Think of the sheer power that came with the ability to say, "Here, this is what I saw. This is where you go." It was the ultimate you had to be there moment, but made accessible to anyone who could interpret the lines and symbols. You were, quite literally, drawing your way to a more interconnected world. From the simple scrape of a stick in the sand to the intricate weaving of a stick chart, these weren't just lines and shapes. They were the blueprints of human exploration, the whispered secrets of survival, and the first tentative steps toward charting the entire, vast, glorious planet beneath your feet. They started as immediate, fleeting messages, but they laid the groundwork for every map, every atlas, and every GPS signal that came after. They transformed how you saw the world by first transforming how you drew it. You stand at the edge of a vast, weathered plain, the air shimmering with the ghost of a distant past. Before you, a monumental structure rises, its lines stark against the infinite sky. It's not just a pile of stones, you realize, but an intentional embrace of the cosmos, a petrified answer to the very questions you've been pondering. Remember how you tracked the sun's daily journey, how you squinted at shadows to divine direction, or how the unwavering stars became your silent navigators across the moonless desert. Well, ancient humanity, ever ingenious, decided these celestial clues weren't just for wayfinding, they were for building. They weren't content to simply know where north was. They wanted to make north, south, east, and west tangible, permanent, and utterly undeniable. No longer were directions merely whispered advice or scratched marks on a clay tablet. Now they were carved into bedrock, etched into the very foundations of temples and tombs, cities and homes. You can almost feel the collective determination of countless hands, meticulously hauling stone, adjusting angles, all guided by an unseen cosmic blueprint. This wasn't just construction. It was cosmology in concrete form, a monumental act of pinning the heavens to the earth. And let's be honest, trying to precisely align a multi-ton block of limestone with the true North Pole using only a plumb bob and the Big Dipper. You probably won't survive this kind of ancient engineering gig. By the way, your back and your sanity would be the first casualties. The most famous examples, of course, are the Great Pyramids of Giza. You gaze upon their colossal forms, the sheer scale breathtaking. Imagine the pharaohs, their architects, and their priests standing on this very spot, not just dreaming of eternal resting places, but of perfectly aligned cosmic gateways. The four sides of the Great Pyramid of Khufu, for instance, are aligned with an astonishing degree of accuracy to the cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. We're talking about an error of less than 0.05 degrees. Think about that for a second. Without magnetic compasses, without GPS, without even basic surveying equipment as we know it, they managed to orient these gargantuan structures with a precision that still baffles modern engineers. It's like trying to thread a needle in a sandstorm, blindfolded, while someone's shouting directions from a very high cloud. You'd think they just got lucky, but similar alignments crop up across ancient Egypt, from Luxor to Karnak, suggesting a deliberate and deeply understood practice. And it wasn't just the Egyptians playing cosmic connect-the-dots. You journey further across oceans to Mesoamerica, where the mighty pyramids and temples of the Maya, Aztecs, and Teotihuacanos also speak of a profound obsession with astronomical alignment. Take the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. Its western face aligns almost perfectly with the sunset on the days of the spring and autumn equinoxes. Or the Castillo at Chichen Itza, which casts a serpent's shadow down its stairway during the equinoxes. A deliberate, jaw-dropping display of celestial knowledge embedded in stone. These aren't just happy accidents. They are conscious declarations of humanity's place within a structured, observable cosmos. They saw the sun not just as a light source, but as a giant clock, and they built their world to keep time with it. It's enough to make you wonder if your alarm clock is truly appreciating the millennia of observational effort that went into its very concept. But beyond the grand statements, there's a quiet, more whimsical example of directional architecture. Imagine the ancient Roman bathhouses. While not always aligned to the cardinal points for mystical reasons, some were positioned to capture the maximum sunlight for heating specific rooms. A purely practical, yet directional decision. And then there's the quirky tidbit of the medieval European churches. While many were deliberately oriented towards the east, symbolizing Christ's resurrection and the rising sun, some particularly zealous builders would orient their churches not to true east, but to the exact point of the sunrise on their patron saint's feast day. So St. Benedict's church might point ever so slightly differently than St. Michael's. depending on their calendar dates. It's a charmingly human touch on such a grand, sacred scale, like a cosmic, bless you from a very specific sunrise. Now, historians still argue whether the staggering precision of structures like the Giza pyramids was achieved through observation of a circumpolar star like Thuban, which was the pole star in ancient Egyptian times, using water levels, or even through some form of astronomical transit method involving the precise tracking of the sun's passage at midday. Was it all just brilliant, painstaking observation, or was there some lost surveying technique that made it easier than we can fathom? The debate continues to echo through dusty academic halls, a testament to the enduring mystery of ancient ingenuity. But whatever the method, the intent was clear: to anchor their existence, their beliefs, and their very civilizations to the unwavering framework of north, south, east, and west, transforming transient knowledge into permanent, awe-inspiring stone. You can almost hear the soft, satisfied sigh of a long-dead architect, seeing their masterpiece perfectly framed by the setting sun, knowing they had captured a piece of eternity. Babylonian sky charts, astronomical observations link celestial patterns to earthly directions. Imagine yourself, an ancient Babylonian, bundled against the cool desert night. You're not just looking at stars. You're deciphering a cosmic map, etched in diamond dust on velvet black. The air is still, save for the distant hum of the distant city and the occasional bleating of a goat. You shiver not just from the chill, but from the sheer immensity of the task, making sense of this dazzling, rotating dome above you. Without understanding these patterns, navigating beyond your village limits would be a death sentence. You probably wouldn't survive the desert, let alone a single night trip trying to find your way back if you wandered off the path. Remember how those ancient structures, those magnificent temples and ziggurats, seem to whisper secrets of alignment to the cardinal points. Well, now you're about to dive into why they knew those cardinal points with such uncanny precision. It wasn't just guessing. It was the result of a profound, patient, and utterly mind-blowing relationship with the heavens. If those early builders were aligning their bricks by the sun's rise and set, the Babylonians were aligning their very understanding of the world by the meticulous dance of planets and stars. The Babylonians, living in Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, in case you needed a refresher on ancient geography pop quizzes, were, to put it mildly, obsessed with the sky. Not in a let's all stare at a meteor shower with a sense of wonder kind of way, but in a highly systematized, scholarly, and frankly, a bit superstitious way. These folks were the OG astronomers, long before Copernicus was even a twinkle in history's eye. The Babylonians were diligently observing, recording, and predicting celestial phenomena with astonishing accuracy. They compiled extensive star catalogs, such as the famous MULAPIN, which painstakingly detailed the positions of hundreds of stars and constellations. They tracked the complex movements of planets, charted the lunar cycle with impressive precision, and even predicted eclipses that terrified or delighted their populace. This wasn't just casual stargazing. This was serious science, millennia in the making, all meticulously inscribed on clay tablets in their distinctive cuneiform script. Each tablet, often no bigger than your palm, held secrets of the cosmos, a tiny Rosetta Stone to the sky. Now, here's a quirky tidbit for your bedtime brain. While they were brilliant observers, their primary motivation wasn't necessarily just pure scientific curiosity in the way we understand it today. For the Babylonians, The heavens were a giant, cosmic billboard plastered with divine messages. Every twinkle, every planetary alignment, every eclipse was an omen, a clue from the gods about the future of the king, the success of the harvest, or whether your neighbor would finally return that borrowed donkey spoiler. They probably wouldn't. So, while they were incredibly precise with their astronomical measurements, they were often doing it to predict doom or fortune, not just to, find north for a camping trip. It's like having a supercomputer to predict your lottery numbers. Only instead of money, you're trying to predict the whims of irritable deities. And speaking of motivation, historians still argue whether their primary motivation was purely scientific observation, aimed at understanding the cosmos for its own sake, or largely astrological prognostication, aimed at influencing earthly affairs through divine interpretation. Was it science, or was it superstition with an extremely precise abacus? The debate continues, often with very polite yet firm academic harumphs, usually over ancient pottery shards. So how did this sky-gazing turn into knowing your north from your south with such newfound exactitude? It was a gradual process, but a profound one. Remember how the sun gives you a rough east-west. The Babylonians took that concept and dialed it up to 11, then calibrated it for every hour of the night and every season of the year. By meticulously observing the rising and setting points of not just the sun, but also prominent stars and constellations throughout the year, they began to establish fixed reference points in the night sky. These points were constant, dependable, and available even when the sun was nowhere to be seen. They possessed a sophisticated understanding of the ecliptic, the apparent path the sun takes across the celestial sphere over the course of a year. But it wasn't just the sun. They watched the moon and the 5 visible planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, as they danced along this same celestial highway. Each of these celestial bodies, with their unique cycles and predictable movements, offered a consistent directional marker. For example, the precise point on the horizon where a particular star or constellation rose or set could indicate a specific direction, far more reliably than a fleeting shadow at midday. You might say they had the ultimate star-studded GPS. Think of it like this. If you watched a specific bright star rise every night and you marked that spot on the horizon, you'd have a consistent directional anchor. Do this for a few key stars, and suddenly you've got a celestial compass laid out above you. They didn't have physical compasses, of course, but they had the night sky, and they had patience, an incredible millennium-long patience. They also divided the sky into zones, establishing the foundations of what we now know as the zodiac. These zodiacal constellations, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so on, served as celestial landmarks, allowing them to pinpoint positions and, by extension, directions, even when specific stars weren't immediately visible. This wasn't just about finding east at sunrise. It was about defining directions with a much higher degree of spatial awareness, day or night, season to season. Their elaborate calendrical systems, meticulously based on these celestial cycles, further reinforced this directional understanding. Specific festivals and rituals were often aligned with solstices and equinoxes, tying sacred space directly to precise cardinal points. If an important ritual required facing east for a propitious omen, they knew precisely which east they meant. Their numerical system, base 60, which is why we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. Another little historical callback for you that makes sense once you know the origin, was perfectly suited for astronomical calculations. They could divide the sky into precise segments, track angular distances, and predict movements with incredible mathematical rigor for their time. This allowed for the creation of incredibly detailed astronomical tables and ephemerides, predicting the positions of celestial bodies years, even decades, into the future. Imagine a priest astronomer, hunched over a clay tablet, painstakingly inscribing columns of data. The day, the hour, the position of Jupiter relative to a certain star, the lunar phase. These weren't just random jottings. They were building an astronomical almanac, a grand reference guide for navigation, timekeeping, and yes, direction. They effectively codified the sky, transforming an ephemeral panorama into a reliable, directional grid. One might even say they were the first true data scientists, albeit with less coffee and more clay, and probably no ergonomic chairs. This systematic charting allowed them to transcend the immediate, localized understanding of direction. It moved beyond the sun rises over that hill to the sun rises at X degrees east of north on the spring equinox, as calculated by the position of star Y. It was a leap from empirical observation to predictive models, a fundamental shift in how humanity understood and defined space. They began to understand that north wasn't just the cold direction, or where the great river flows from. It was the direction aligned with a specific, constant celestial pole, or at least the region around it, as the actual pole star shifts over millennia. They were mapping the heavens to map the Earth. So next time you see a fancy compass or glance at a GPS on your phone, spare a thought for the Mesopotamians, patiently charting their destiny and our understanding of direction. One star, one planet, one meticulously inscribed clay tablet at a time. It's comforting to know that even thousands of years ago, people were looking up and saying, "Right, so that's that way." It's almost like they were leaving us a cosmic breadcrumb trail, saying, "Don't worry, future humans, we've got your directions covered." And frankly, after all that meticulous observation, if they told you north was up, you'd probably believe them. This systematic approach, moving from the concrete observation of shadows to the abstract, mathematical modeling of celestial mechanics, truly cemented the concept of fixed, universal cardinal directions. No longer reliant on just the immediate environment, they had found a universal constant in the heavens. It allowed for planning journeys, aligning cities, and perhaps most importantly, understanding their place in a vast, ordered cosmos. You stand on the sun-baked marble steps of the Athenian agora, the scent of olive oil and dried herbs hanging heavy in the warm air. The sun, a fiery disk, slowly descends towards the shimmering Aegean, pulling long, languid shadows across the stoas where philosophers gather. You watch a ship, a trireme perhaps, its single square sail billowing as it sails further and further out to sea, its hull disappearing first, then its mast, until only the tiniest speck of its highest point remains, swallowed by the curve of the horizon. This is not the Babylon of meticulously charted stars, nor the Egypt of aligned pyramids, though you've seen their careful work, remember. Remember how they traced the sun's path across a seemingly flat sky, how they used fixed stars to orient their temples. Here, under this brilliant Greek light, a new kind of curiosity stirs, a deeper question about the very stage upon which these celestial dramas play out. It's no longer just about where things are in the sky, but what the earth itself is. For centuries, the prevailing wisdom, born of simple observation, whispered of a flat, disc-shaped world, perhaps floating on a primordial ocean, a notion that, frankly, sounds a little more comfortable for your fragile human brain. But here, in these bustling city-states, minds like Pythagoras, long before he gave you nightmares with his triangles, began to quietly suggest something radical. What if the Earth wasn't flat at all? What if it was, in fact, a sphere? Aristotle, a name you've heard whispered in every dusty library, didn't just theorize. He gathered evidence. You see ships disappearing hull first over the horizon, and he notes it. You see a lunar eclipse, and the shadow the Earth casts on the moon is always round, no matter what angle you catch it from. And as you travel north or south, new constellations appear above the horizon while others dip below it. A phenomenon only explainable if you're traversing the surface of a curved object, not a flat plane. It's simple, elegant, and frankly, a bit of a mic drop moment for his era. Imagine trying to explain that to someone who still thinks the sun is a god pulled across the sky by a chariot. You probably wouldn't survive that conversation without being accused of heresy, or at the very least, bad manners. Once the Earth was accepted as a sphere, a truly revolutionary thought for navigation began to take root. How do you map a ball? How do you give specific addresses on a curved surface? The answer, as elegant as the sphere itself, came in the form of imaginary lines. Lines running from pole to pole, which we now call meridians, and lines running parallel to the equator, known as parallels of latitude. Think of an orange, and the segments from top to bottom are your meridians, while the rings around its middle are your parallels. These weren't visible in the sky like the stars, nor were they etched into the land like riverbeds. They were purely intellectual constructs, born of logical necessity. This brings us to Eratosthenes, a polymath who was not only the chief librarian at the Great Library of Alexandria, but also a geographer, mathematician, poet, and athlete. His claim to fame, the one that makes every geometry teacher secretly swoon, is his remarkably accurate calculation of the Earth's circumference. This isn't just a quirky tidbit, it's a foundational moment in human understanding of their place in the universe. He used these very concepts of a spherical Earth and meridians to pull it off. You see, Eratosthenes heard tales from Sin, a city to the south, modern-day Aswan, Egypt, where on the summer solstice at noon, the sun's rays shone directly down a deep well, illuminating the water perfectly. This meant the sun was directly overhead. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, hundreds of miles to the north, at the same time on the same day, the sun was not directly overhead. It cast a shadow. He measured the angle of that shadow and found it to be about 1/50th of a full circle. So, if the Earth was a sphere, and the two cities lay roughly on the same meridian, a crucial assumption, by the way, that probably kept him up at night, then the distance between Sin and Alexandria represented 1/50th of the Earth's total circumference. A quick calculation, using the known distance between the cities which, granted, was probably measured by professional pacers walking it. So accuracy varied. Imagine trying to get them to hold a straight line after a few too many amphorae of wine. Gave him a figure astonishingly close to modern estimates. For a guy with no GPS, no satellites, and no Google Maps, that's less of a calculation and more of a wizard trick. Now, despite these groundbreaking insights, it's important to remember that the idea of a flat Earth didn't vanish overnight. Even within Greek thought, there were debates. Some philosophers continued to cling to older cosmologies, finding the notion of living on a spinning ball quite disorienting, even dangerous. Imagine trying to explain to your average farmer that the ground beneath his feet was curving. He'd probably just nod politely, and then go back to wondering when the next flood was coming. It's a reminder that revolutionary ideas, no matter how well supported by evidence, often take centuries to truly permeate the collective consciousness. Historians still argue whether Eratosthenes' calculation was a lucky guess, given the inaccuracies in ancient distance measurements, or a testament to his sheer intellectual brilliance and the robustness of his methodology. Was the 50th of a circle angle truly precise, or did he round it conveniently? These are the kinds of questions that keep scholars up at night, long after you've drifted off. These abstract lines, the meridians and parallels, became the invisible grid upon which the Greeks would begin to project their maps of the known world. No longer were you just remembering the bend in the river or the distinctive shape of a mountain, as you did with your natural landmark trails. Now you could conceptually place any point on Earth using a system of coordinates, even if the tools to accurately find those coordinates were still centuries away. It was a leap from the experiential, the "I know this because I walked it," to the theoretical, the "I know this because the mathematics says so." Think of it. You're no longer just following wind and water wisdom. You're starting to understand the global system they operate within. You begin to see how this shift in understanding, from a flat world to a spherical one, fundamentally changed how people thought about direction and distance. North, south, east, and west were no longer just relative to your current position or the rising sun. They were fixed points on a grand, curving stage. It was the birth of true global orientation, even if it started as an idea only whispered among philosophers and scribbled on papyrus scrolls. The stage was set for the Romans to take these grand ideas and try to build an empire upon them, literally mapping their vast domains across this newly understood sphere. You stand there, a faint breeze kicking up dust from the freshly compacted gravel beneath your worn sandals. The air hums with the distant shouts of legionaries, their rhythmic grunts as they heave another massive stone into place. Before you, a ribbon of engineered perfection stretches, impossibly straight, a dark vein across the green landscape, disappearing into the hazy horizon. This isn't just a path. It's an artery of empire, a testament to precision, and a living, breathing lesson in figuring out exactly where you are, and more importantly, where you're going. You're part of a Roman survey team, and today, you're helping lay out another segment of the Via Appia, or maybe the Via Egnatia, or perhaps some forgotten military road that will, in time, become just another whisper in the wind. You squint, shading your eyes against the relentless Mediterranean sun. Your eyes follow the sightline, a needle-thin projection from the Groma your chief surveyor, old Marcus, meticulously adjusts. That Groma, a simple wooden cross with plumb bobs hanging from each arm, is your oracle of straightness, your compass in miniature. It's how you translate the abstract concept of a true bearing into a tangible line on the earth. Forget relying on the general direction of the sun, like those early folks we talked about, or hoping a prominent peak stays visible. You're building something that will outlast mountains, something that imposes order on chaos. And let's be honest, the chaos isn't just the wild landscape. It's the sheer, back-breaking, sweat-drenching, blisters on top of blisters effort of it all. You're not just drawing lines on a map. You're literally moving mountains, or at least hills. Imagine trying to lay out a perfect straight line for miles across uneven terrain, through forests thick with unseen threats, or across marshlands that suck at your boots with every step, with nothing but that Groma and a few grumpy legionaries who'd rather be fighting Gauls than moving dirt. You'd probably lose an eye to a stray rock, or your sanity trying to convince a local chieftain to let you build through his sacred grove, long before you finished the first mile. Survival in this game is not guaranteed, but survive you do because the Empire demands it. These roads aren't just for trade, though trade flourishes along them like dandelions in spring. They're primarily for military might, for rapid troop movement, for ensuring that even the most distant outpost feels the immediate iron fist of Rome. And for that you need direction, absolute and unyielding. How do they do it? You watch Marcus, his brow furrowed in concentration. He's not just eyeballing it. He's consulting tables, perhaps even little parchments detailing astronomical observations. Not just the daily sun path from way back when, but the precise rise and set points of specific stars, those steadfast guides from our second section. Remember how primitive societies used fixed stars? Well, the Romans, ever the pragmatists, industrialized it. At night, they might align their initial survey lines using the North Star, Polaris, or other prominent constellations, carrying that precise bearing forward with the Groma and sighting poles. This allows them to project a true north-south or east-west line across the landscape, unperturbed by local magnetic anomalies, which they wouldn't have understood anyway, or the shifting winds that guided early seafarers. The sheer scale of their achievement is mind-boggling. The Roman road network at its peak stretched for an estimated 250,000 miles across the empire, with about 50,000 miles of paved roads. Think about that for a moment. That's 10 times around the Earth's equator. Every single mile meticulously planned, surveyed, and built to incredibly precise specifications, often following remarkably straight lines for dozens of miles. They didn't just stumble upon these directions, they calculated them. One of the clever little tricks you learn on the job is the use of a hodometer, a kind of ancient odometer, to measure distance. It's basically a cart with a gearing mechanism attached to its wheel, dropping a pebble into a box for every Roman mile traveled. It's not about direction, per se, but it's a fringe tidbit that shows their obsession with measurement and efficiency. You can almost hear old Marcus muttering, "Another pebble, another mile closer to civilization." Or at least, another legionary camp with real wine. These devices, while not directly telling you north, reinforced the systematic approach to travel and surveying, ensuring that distances between points were accurately known, which in turn helped verify directional accuracy. If you know you're supposed to be 30 miles due east, and your hodometer says you've gone 30 miles, you'd better be roughly due east. The construction itself is a layered marvel. You start with trenches, deep and wide, then fill them with successive layers. Large stones at the bottom for drainage and foundation, followed by smaller stones, then gravel mixed with mortar, and finally, often a paving of large, flat stones. This isn't just about building a durable surface. It's about creating a stable platform for maintaining direction. Any deviation in the foundation would throw off the alignment of the top layers, and ultimately, the road's intended direction. But here's a thought that keeps scholars scratching their heads. Historians still debate whether the Romans' primary directional reference was always true north, or if they sometimes aligned roads with prominent sunrise, sunset points on specific dates, or even local geomagnetic variations that might have, unknowingly, pulled their compassless alignments slightly off. After all, what was true north to them wasn't quite the absolute concept it is to us with our fancy GPS. They were working with the observable sky and their ingenious, if simple, tools. Was it pragmatism over perfection, or a perfection dictated by their understanding of the cosmos? You pause, taking a sip from your water skin, the cool liquid a momentary reprieve from the dust. You remember those early sketch maps, the crude visual representations that merely showed, here be dragons and river that way. Now you're creating maps of the Earth with the Earth itself. You're building, literally, a network of lines that define direction across an entire continent. These roads don't just connect cities. They connect the abstract idea of north to south and east to west, giving them a physical manifestation. The very act of laying a Roman road is an exercise in applied directional awareness. Every straight stretch, every gradual curve designed to overcome a natural obstacle, is a testament to their mastery of surveying. They understood, perhaps intuitively, the geometry of a sphere, even if their Greek predecessors theorized about it more explicitly. They needed to know how to maintain a straight line on a curved surface over vast distances, correcting for the Earth's own gentle bulge. It's a bit like trying to draw a straight line on an orange peel. It might look straight for a short distance, but over a long stretch, you'll start to curve unless you adjust. And their architectural alignments, those ancient structures that revealed intentional orientation to cardinal points. The Romans integrated that knowledge into their very infrastructure. Their roads often passed through or connected directly to cities that were themselves laid out on a grid, aligned with the cardinal directions. It was a symbiotic relationship. The city needed the road, and the road reinforced the city's internal directional order. It was all part of a grand, imperial design to impose order, both physical and conceptual, upon the vast territories they controlled. You hear the foreman barking orders, and you snap back to the task at hand. The sun is beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues, but the work continues. Tomorrow you'll push further, another segment laid, another milestone erected. Another testament to how humans figured out north, south, east, and west. Not just in the sky, but firmly, concretely on the ground beneath their feet. You're trekking through a landscape you've probably walked 100 times, the sun baking the dust onto your bare feet, the familiar scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke filling the air. You pass that gnarled mulberry tree you always notice, skirt the edge of the bamboo grove where the cicadas hum their endless song, and round the bend towards the shallow river where the water buffalo sometimes cool themselves. But today something's different. Your foot snags on a dark, heavy stone, half buried in the soil near the riverbank. It's unremarkable at first glance, just another rock in a land full of them. But as you stoop to dislodge it, something peculiar happens. You're wearing a small iron amulet, perhaps a gift from your grandmother, and as your hand brushes the stone, you feel a subtle tug. Not just a bump, but a pull, like an invisible string drawing your amulet to the rock. You pick it up, examining the strange stone, rough and dark, perhaps a little dull in the light. And then you try again, holding your amulet closer, and the tug is stronger. It's as if the stone breathes, a silent, invisible breath pulling at the metal. You try a small iron nail, and it leaps from your palm, clinging to the stone with an unyielding grip. This isn't just a rock. This is something else entirely. It's a lodestone, a naturally magnetized piece of magnetite, and it's about to fundamentally shift how humanity understands direction, long before anyone even whispers the word compass. Think about it. You've been relying on the sun's steady march across the sky, the steadfast twinkle of Polaris, the whispers of the wind, the ancient pathways etched by generations into the very earth. You've even drawn crude maps, remembering the bend in a river or the peak of a mountain. But this is an unseen force, a magic woven into the very fabric of the world, pulling at metal. It's like finding out gravity isn't just about apples falling from trees. but about you being pulled down every second, even when you're just lounging on a bamboo mat. Pretty wild, right? And honestly, if you were relying solely on your gut feeling and a prayer to the heavens to find your way through some of the more unforgiving terrain, you probably wouldn't survive this, not without a little help from the universe's hidden secrets. The early Chinese, with their keen observational skills and deep connection to the natural world, were among the first to truly grapple with this invisible magnetism. They noticed that not only did these loving stones, as they were sometimes called, for their attraction to iron pull at iron, but when allowed to swing freely, they consistently pointed in a specific direction. Not north, as you might instinctively think, given our modern compasses, but consistently south. Imagine the quiet wonder, the patient experimentation. You tie a piece of lodestone on a string, let it spin, and watch as it settles, always pointing to the sun's zenith, the place of heat and life. It must have felt like harnessing a piece of the cosmos itself. This wasn't just a parlor trick or a fascinating oddity. This was a fundamental discovery with profound implications. By the 4th century BCE, or even earlier, texts began to mention the properties of these magnetic stones. One of the earliest, the Master Lu's Spring and Autumn Annals, speaks of a south-pointing fish, or spoon, depending on translation, carved from lodestone. This wasn't some fanciful myth, it was a practical instrument. Imagine a polished bronze plate, perhaps circular, etched with the cardinal directions. Upon its smooth surface, a lodestone spoon, carefully balanced, would pivot freely on its handle. You'd set it down, give it a gentle nudge, and watch as its bowl or head slowly, steadily settled, pointing south. It was a divining tool, yes, but also an early form of a navigational aid, a silent guide in a world of shifting landscapes and cloud-obscured skies. This initial understanding of lodestone wasn't just about finding south for travelers. It was deeply intertwined with early Chinese cosmology, with the principles of geomancy, known as feng shui. The belief was that understanding and aligning with the invisible energies, Kai of the land, guided by the cardinal directions, was essential for harmony and prosperity. So, a south-pointing spoon wasn't just telling you which way was south. It was connecting you to the very flow of the universe, helping you align your home, your ancestors' grave, or even your garden with the auspicious energies of the cosmos. It's a bit like using your phone's GPS not just to get to Starbucks, but to find the perfect spot in your living room for maximum positive vibes. If only it were that simple, right? Now, historians still argue whether these earliest south-pointing devices were truly used for wide-scale navigation or primarily for divination and geomancy. Were they proto-compasses in the modern sense, guiding ships across open seas, or more ceremonial instruments used by priests and architects? The evidence suggests a gradual evolution. From the diviner's spoon, the technology slowly morphed into more practical devices. By the Song Dynasty, 960-1279 C, the magnetic compass in various forms was definitely in use for navigation. You had wet compasses, where a magnetized needle floated on water, and later dry compasses, where the needle was pivoted on a sharp pin, making them more stable and less prone to splashing. Which, let's be honest, is a huge plus when you're on a wobbly boat. Imagine trying to navigate by a floating spoon in a storm. You'd be more likely to find yourself with a mouthful of bronze and regret than a direction. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Chinese were the first to understand and harness magnetic phenomena for directional purposes, long before similar discoveries in the West. While Europe relied on the sun, stars, and established trade routes, Chinese mariners and overland travelers were equipped with this silent, unwavering guide. This invention, humble as it might seem in retrospect, fundamentally altered the human relationship with direction. No longer were you solely reliant on celestial bodies or familiar landmarks. Now, a small piece of magnetized iron, a rock that pulled at metal, could tell you where you were in relation to the world's invisible magnetic field, even on the darkest night or the cloudiest day. It was a literal game changer, opening up possibilities for exploration and trade that were previously unthinkable, a beacon in the vast, directionless void. This was the moment when direction stopped being something you observed and became something you could hold in your hand. Compass spreads west. The magnetic compass arrives in Europe, transforming navigation. You're out on the vast, inky blackness of the ocean. The stars are obscured by a thick blanket of clouds, and the moon is a no-show. The wind howls, tearing at the sails, and the waves crash against your tiny vessel, threatening to swallow you whole. Panic begins to gnaw at your gut, a cold, sharp dread. Where are you? Which way is back? Which way is forward? Without the familiar dance of the sun, or the comforting twinkle of the North Star you remember from earlier nights, you are truly, profoundly lost. This isn't a scene from a blockbuster movie, dear listener. This was the brutal reality for sailors for millennia. And frankly, without a little needle pointing the way, you probably wouldn't survive this. For centuries, you, as the intrepid navigator, had relied on the sun's predictable arc across the sky, its shadow stretching out like a loyal, silent guide. By night, you'd squint up at the fixed stars, learning their ancient patterns, memorizing the subtle shift of constellations. You'd feel the prevailing winds on your cheek, taste the salt of the currents, and recall the unique contours of coastlines, those natural landmark trails etched into your memory. You even learned to sketch crude maps, remember. The Chinese, meanwhile, had been tinkering with those intriguing lodestones, discovering their peculiar affinity for the magnetic poles. But for Europe, a truly reliable, all-weather, day or night directional tool remained an elusive dream. Until now. Imagine the whispers that start circulating along the bustling trade routes, carried by merchants returning from the east, by scholars exchanging cryptic manuscripts, by crusaders bringing back more than just tales of distant lands. Rumors of a magical needle, always pointing north, regardless of clouds, fog, or the endless, featureless expanse of the open sea. It sounds like sorcery, doesn't it? Almost too good to be true. But gradually, piece by painstaking piece, the technology of the magnetic compass, already developed and refined in China, begins its westward journey. It travels along the Silk Road, passes through the hands of Arab traders and scholars who diligently translate, adapt, and improve upon the original designs. And eventually, sometime in the late 12th or early 13th century, it makes its quiet, unassuming debut in European maritime circles. This isn't a grand, trumpet-blaring arrival. It's more like a subtle shift in the wind, a quiet revolution brewing beneath the surface of the vast ocean. You see, for the first time, you no longer need the sun or the stars to tell you which way is which. This tiny, magnetized piece of metal, often just a needle floating in a bowl of water, or later, pivoted on a pin, becomes your constant, unwavering companion. It's always there, always pointing, always reliable. Well, mostly reliable. Historians still argue whether the compass was an independent invention in Europe, a direct import from China, or, more likely, a technology that diffused through the Arab world, with various improvements made along its journey. Regardless of its exact lineage, its impact is undeniable. Think about what this means for you, the medieval sailor. No longer are you forced to hug the coastline, fearful of venturing too far from familiar landmarks. You can now strike out across open water, confident that you can maintain a consistent bearing. Suddenly, voyages that were once impossible become merely perilous. Trade routes expand, exploration becomes more ambitious, and the very concept of the known world begins to stretch at its seams. Before the compass, navigating across the vast Atlantic would have been an act of sheer, terrifying faith, reliant on a clear sky and a healthy dose of luck. Now, you've got a fighting chance. It's like upgrading from navigating with a string and a pebble to having an early, clunky version of GPS, minus the soothing voice telling you to turn right in 200 feet. Though, let's be honest, an early compass probably required a lot more turning right in 200 feet than you'd prefer. Of course, the arrival of such a novel and seemingly magical device wasn't without its quirks and superstitions. You might have heard whispers among your fellow sailors that garlic, for instance, could somehow interfere with the compass's magnetic properties, rendering it useless. Or perhaps you'd encounter someone who believed the needle pointed not to a magnetic pole, but to a vast, invisible magnetic mountain somewhere far to the north, a sort of lodestone Shangri-La. Such beliefs, while amusing in retrospect, highlight the profound mystery and awe that this simple instrument inspired. It was a tool that seemed to defy the known laws of the natural world, a direct link to some unseen force. The compass wasn't just a gadget, it was a psychological game changer. For centuries, the fear of being truly lost at sea, adrift in a featureless void, had been a constant companion for mariners. The compass, with its unwavering pointer, offered a tangible sense of direction, a thread to cling to in the bewildering vastness. It didn't make the storms disappear or the rogue waves vanish, but it gave you back control, a sense of agency over your destiny. You could set a course and, despite all the forces conspiring against you, stay on it. This single instrument transformed navigation from an art form reliant on fickle weather and celestial alignments into a more precise, scientific endeavor. It ushered in an era where knowing which way is north wasn't just a philosophical musing, but a practical, life-saving piece of information that could literally redraw the maps of the world. It was a small step for a needle, but a giant leap for mankind's understanding of its place on the planet. You're on deck, the vast, inky canvas of the night sky stretching above you, dotted with countless pinpricks of light. The gentle rocking of the ship, a lullaby of waves against wood, belies the immense challenge facing you. The magnetic compass, revolutionary as it was, pointed north. But on the vast, featureless ocean, it couldn't tell you where you were. It was like a GPS that only says, you are moving east, but never, you are here. And let's be honest, without that you are here part on the open sea, you probably won't survive this voyage without a generous dose of sheer dumb luck and maybe a very, very patient deity. Enter the golden age of Islam, roughly 8th to 14th century, where scholars across the Middle East and North Africa looked up. Way up. They weren't just observing stars. They interrogated them, demanding answers about earthly position. They understood the celestial sphere held the key to precise navigation, seeking measurements, calculations, proof. Their hunger for knowledge was practical. Trade routes, pilgrimages, and military campaigns demanded accurate, repeatable journeys. So, they refined old ideas and invented new instruments, truly revolutionizing how humanity understood its place on the planet. The first big star in this constellation of navigational genius is the astrolabe. Its name, derived from Greek, literally means star-taker. Imagine holding a beautiful, intricately engraved brass disc, often no bigger than a dinner plate, yet packed with more information than many modern-day app interfaces. You hold it by a ring, letting it hang freely. Then you align a rotating arm, the alidade, with a celestial body, Polaris, or a prominent star. Peer through tiny sights, ensuring your chosen star is perfectly framed. Once aligned, you read the altitude, or height, of that star above the horizon from the engraved scale. Sounds simple. Well, it's about as simple as assembling IKEA furniture without instructions, then wondering if it's a bookshelf or modern art. But the astrolabe wasn't just a fancy sextant's ancestor. It was the Swiss army knife of medieval science. You could determine latitude by measuring the altitude of Polaris or the sun at its meridian, but also tell time, find sunrise and sunset, cast horoscopes, because why not? And even determine the Qibla, the direction of Mecca. A single portable device pinpointing your location north or south, telling time and guiding your spiritual compass. It was a marvel. The sheer precision it offered, especially for latitude, meant a ship captain, no longer relying on guesswork, could confirm their position with unimaginable accuracy. They could sail for weeks, cross vast oceans, and still know with relative certainty their north-south position. Here's a quirky tidbit. While most astrolabes were brass, some opulent ones were silver or gold, even encrusted with jewels. Imagine navigating with something so valuable. You'd be more worried about pirates. The mainstream historical fact is undeniable. The astrolabe, significantly refined and disseminated by Islamic scholars like Muhammad al-Fazari and al-Khwarizmi from earlier Greek and Indian instruments, marked a pivotal leap in navigational accuracy and scientific understanding. They weren't just copying. They innovated, adding new features, improving precision, and writing comprehensive treatises. These were translated and spread, profoundly influencing European science for centuries. Then there was the quadrant. Simpler, often more robust, and sometimes easier for specific tasks, it was a quarter of a circle. You'd hold it by a ring at the apex, let it hang vertically, and sight through pins or a tube to a celestial body. A plumb line would then fall across a graduated arc, allowing you to read the angle. It was often favored for measuring the sun's altitude at noon to calculate latitude. While it lacked the astrolabe's multifunctionality, its simplicity often made it the go-to tool for quick, on-the-spot latitude measurements, especially on a pitching deck. Think of it as the no-frills, reliable workhorse compared to the astrolabe's fancy smartphone. These instruments didn't just help with celestial positioning, they fundamentally refined it. Before them, navigation was often about sighting and approximation. With them, it became a science of precise angles, calculations, and tables. Mariners could move beyond hugging coastlines or relying on landmarks. Remember those trails. Now you could venture further, knowing stars and the sun, measured correctly, would always tell you your north-south position. Historians still argue whether the spherical astrolabe truly originated in the Islamic world, or was a refinement of earlier Hellenistic concepts. But there's no debate about the profound impact Islamic scholars had on their development and practical application for navigation. Their meticulous observations and precise instruments allowed for unprecedented accuracy in sea voyages. You're no longer just hoping to stumble upon land. You're plotting a course with a confidence that would make earlier sailors weep with joy. The astrolabe and quadrant, products of an age valuing knowledge and practical application, provided the essential framework for understanding and mastering the north-south axis on a scale never before achieved. They paved the way for longer, safer voyages, opening new trade routes and connecting distant cultures. You could now determine your position with a scientific rigor that transformed navigation from an art based on instinct into a quantifiable science. As you drift off, imagine those intricate brass instruments catching the moonlight, silently guiding ancient mariners across vast, unknown oceans, their numbers whispering the precise location of home or the lucrative markets of a distant land. They are the silent witnesses to humanity's relentless quest to know precisely where we are and where we're going. Imagine, if you will, being utterly lost. Not just misplaced on a street you vaguely recognize, but truly, existentially lost, adrift on the vast, gray expanse of the North Atlantic. You're on a longship, the wind whips at your face, tugging at your furs, and the air bites with a chill that seeps into your bones. Around you, a thick, impenetrable blanket of cloud has descended, swallowing the sun, the horizon, and every last glimmer of a star you might have once used as a guide. The rhythmic creak of the timbers beneath your feet is the only constant in a world that feels suddenly, terrifyingly, without up or down, north or south. You're sailing blind, and frankly, you probably won't survive this. No sun, no stars, just endless gray and the terrifying possibility of drifting into oblivion or onto jagged, unseen rocks. This was the very real, very frequent nightmare of the Vikings, those legendary seafarers who dared to push beyond the known world, navigating treacherous waters from Scandinavia to North America. While we've talked about how earlier peoples used the sun's arc, the unwavering stars, and even the subtle shifts of wind and current, what happens when the heavens betray you? What if the sun is a mere rumor behind a ceiling of oppressive cloud, and the stars are simply gone? Enter the enigma, the fabled Viking sunstone. For centuries, this was little more than a whisper in ancient Norse sagas, a mythological device mentioned in texts like the Ráðolf's Þátr, where it describes King Olaf consulting with a man named Sigurður about the sun's position on a cloudy day. And Sigurður uses a solar stone to confirm it. For the longest time, scholars dismissed it as pure legend, a fanciful embellishment in tales already full of giants and gods. How could a mere stone pierce the veil of the clouds and reveal the hidden sun? But then modern science caught up with ancient whispers. The leading theory suggests that this mysterious sunstone was, in fact, a type of crystal known as Iceland spar or optical calcite. If you've ever held a piece of Iceland spar, you'll notice something remarkable. It has a property called birefringence. This means that when light passes through it, the light splits into two separate rays, which are polarized at right angles to each other. If you place a piece of Iceland spar over text, you'll see double images. It's not just a party trick for geology enthusiasts, it's a key to unlocking the sun's secrets. Think about how light works. Even when the sun itself is hidden behind clouds, its light still penetrates the atmosphere, scattering and bouncing around. This scattered light, particularly the blue light, becomes polarized, meaning its waves oscillate in a specific direction. Your eyes can't detect this polarization directly, but the Iceland spar can. Imagine a Viking navigator on that fog-bound ship. They would hold this crystal up to the sky, slowly rotating it. As they turned the sunstone, the two images they saw through it would appear to brighten and dim. There would be a point, a precise orientation, where one image would be at its brightest and the other at its dimmest, or vice versa. This specific alignment, where the polarization of the light is strongest, points directly towards the sun's hidden position, even if the sun itself is completely obscured. It's like having a secret periscope that sees through the clouds. This isn't some fringe theory conjured in a dusty attic. There's compelling evidence. In 2013, scientists used a real Iceland spar crystal to test this theory, conducting experiments under conditions simulating a cloudy Arctic sky. They found that the crystal could indeed accurately pinpoint the sun's position, even when it was completely out of sight. Moreover, a calcite crystal, believed by many to be such a sunstone, was reportedly found in the wreck of an Elizabethan ship, the Alderney, sunk in 1592, which was hundreds of years after the main Viking Age, but suggests the knowledge persisted. This discovery was a significant moment, providing tangible archaeological evidence that such a device was more than just a myth. It was a tool, perhaps a precious one. The sheer ingenuity of this concept is mind-boggling. While you might be fumbling with your smartphone's GPS, the Vikings were harnessing the subtle physics of light refraction with nothing but a translucent stone. It was a low-tech, high-concept solution to one of the most persistent navigational challenges. However, historians still argue whether the use of these sunstones was widespread among all Viking seafarers, or if it was a highly specialized technique known only to a few master navigators. Some scholars suggest that while the principle is sound, actually using it accurately on the pitching deck of a longship in rough seas would have been incredibly difficult, requiring immense skill and steady hands. Could you truly get an accurate reading when waves are crashing over the bow and the ship is rolling like a barrel? It's a testament to their dedication, to exploration, that they even conceived of such a method. There's also the question of how consistently accurate it would be. While experiments show it works, the margin for error on a long voyage could still be significant. Missing your target by even a few degrees over hundreds of miles means ending up far from your intended destination. Perhaps in an entirely new land, or perhaps simply lost at sea, becoming another grim statistic. It's not quite as precise as, say, knowing the exact angle of Polaris above the horizon that we talked about earlier, but it offers a vital directional clue when all other celestial guides are hidden. Consider the practicalities. A navigator would likely have combined the sunstone's readings with other methods. Perhaps they would use it to get a general bearing, then rely on the feel of the wind and the currents to maintain course. Remember those instinctual navigators who could taste the salinity of the water or feel the shift in a wave pattern. This stone wasn't a silver bullet, but another crucial arrow in their navigational quiver, especially in those notorious northern climes where clear skies are often a luxury. So as the clouds continued to shroud your ship, the Viking navigator would emerge, perhaps from a small cabin, clutching this seemingly unassuming piece of crystal. Squinting, turning, adjusting, he would be wrestling with the invisible forces of light, trying to tease out the sun's hidden direction. It was a moment of profound trust in a stone, trust in ancient knowledge, and trust in the navigator's own skill. And if he got it wrong, well, that's when you might find yourself discovering new lands, or more likely, becoming a permanent resident of the deep. It certainly adds a new layer to the term blind faith, doesn't it? Though one could argue it was more blind sight. The idea that a simple crystal could unlock such complex navigational secrets is a powerful reminder that ingenuity knows no bounds, regardless of technological advancement. The Vikings, through observation and perhaps a touch of sheer desperation, tapped into principles of light that wouldn't be fully understood by science for centuries. It's a quirky tidbit that a piece of rock could be so much more sophisticated than it appears, capable of performing a function that seems almost magical. It transforms what was once dismissed as myth into a plausible, even elegant, piece of ancient technology. And it certainly makes you appreciate your smartphone's weather app just a little bit more, doesn't it? No need to hold up a crystal and hope you're pointing it the right way. Unless, of course, you're trying to find a clear signal for your YouTube host. You feel the sway of the deck beneath your feet, a rhythmic lullaby that, if you're not careful, might just lull you right off this ship and into the dark, churning abyss. Remember those brave Vikings, squinting at sunstones through the mist, or the ancient sailors who hugged the coastline, using familiar landmarks as their breadcrumbs? Well, chuck all that out the porthole, because now you're looking out at nothing but endless, unforgiving ocean. The very edge of the known world, just waiting for you to sail right off it, probably. This, my friend, is the dawn of the global exploration era, where mere survival hinges on something far more refined than a lucky guess or a particularly insightful seagull. We're talking about vast, unfathomable distances now, not just a hop across the English Channel. Your little wooden vessel is a speck, a lonely, creaking coffin against the vastness, and every breath of wind, every subtle shift in the current, means the difference between discovering a new continent and becoming fish food. This is where those earlier experiments with lodestone and celestial observation truly blossomed into life-saving technologies. That simple magnetic needle, once just a curious toy for the Chinese, now a veritable lifeline. But it wasn't just the compass itself that underwent a glow-up. Think about it. A magnetic needle swinging wildly on a rolling deck. Not exactly precise. So engineers, or rather, incredibly clever shipwrights and instrument makers, devised the gimbal suspension, basically a series of concentric rings that kept the compass level, no matter how much your ship pitched and rolled. It was like putting your morning coffee in a perpetual motion machine that refused to spill, even in a hurricane. And instead of floating in water, which could freeze or slosh out, the needles were now affixed to a card, encased in a dry brass box. Suddenly, that little directional pointer became a reliable, always-on guide, a calm, unwavering eye in the storm, telling you, "This way, intrepid explorer, towards what you hope is land and not just more wet stuff." Alongside these advanced compasses, a silent revolution was unfolding on parchment. The rise of truly advanced charts. Forget those rough sketch maps drawn on animal hides, remember. The ones where a squiggly line might represent a mountain range or just a really bad hair day for the cartographer. Now, driven by the ambition of empires and the insatiable thirst for new trade routes, map-making became a science, an art, and a matter of national security. Suddenly, you weren't just charting coastlines. You were charting the curvature of the Earth, grappling with the very real problem of representing a sphere on a flat piece of paper. This led to innovations like the Mercator projection, which you've probably seen hanging in a classroom. It was a game changer because it allowed sailors to plot a straight-line course, called a rum line, and actually sail it. You could draw a line from Lisbon to the Indies, follow your compass, and theoretically end up where you intended. Sure, it made Greenland look like it was the size of Africa, and distorted landmasses closer to the poles like a funhouse mirror. But for navigation, it was a revelation. Imagine trying to get directions using a crumpled napkin with a coffee stain where the destination should be. That was the old way. The Mercator chart was like having Google Maps. albeit one that subtly lied about distances near the top and bottom of the world. These charts weren't just pretty pictures, they were crammed with information. Depths, currents, prevailing winds, even known hazards like reefs and shoals. Every voyage, successful or disastrous, added new data, correcting old errors, filling in blank spaces. And those blank spaces, that's where the true thrill and the true terror lay. You might spend months at sea, your rations dwindling, water turning foul, your crew whispering about sea monsters and mutiny, all while staring at a chart that simply declared terra incognita, unknown land, in the very place you hoped to find fresh water and friendly faces. The integration of these tools was paramount. You'd use the compass for your bearing, the charts for your course. But how did you know if you were still on course or how far you'd come? This is where latitude and longitude, those invisible lines on the globe, became crucial. Latitude was relatively easy to determine using a quadrant or astrolabe, by measuring the height of the North Star or the sun at noon, much like early navigators did. You could get your north-south position with reasonable accuracy. Longitude, however, was the ultimate nemesis. It required knowing the precise time at a reference point, like Greenwich, while simultaneously knowing your local time. Without accurate chronometers, which wouldn't arrive for centuries, you were left with methods like dead reckoning. You'd try to estimate your speed from the ship's log, a piece of wood on a line, tossed overboard to measure knots per hour, hence the term, and your direction from the compass, and then, with a lot of hope and a little prayer, plot your estimated position on the chart. It was less like navigation and more like an educated guess, a constant mental tug-of-war between the known and the utterly unknown. Historians still debate the precise impact of standardized nautical charts on the speed of exploration, wondering if the sheer will of the explorers outweighed the imperfections of their instruments. Many a ship went missing, swallowed by the vastness, simply because their dead reckoning was, well, dead wrong. You're out there in the vast blue, your only friends the creaking timbers, the distant stars, and that steady, unwavering compass needle. You can smell the salt and the mildew, feel the spray on your face, and the constant, nagging doubt in your gut. But you push on, because beyond the horizon, beyond the blank spaces on the map, lies the promise of wealth, glory, or simply the answer to the age-old question, what's out there? The first circumnavigation of the Earth, accomplished by Ferdinand Magellan's expedition in the early 16th century, was a testament to this era's ambition and reliance on these new navigational tools, even if Magellan himself didn't complete the full journey. It proved, beyond any doubt, that the world was indeed a sphere, and that these advanced compasses and charts, despite their flaws, truly could guide you across its entirety. It was a journey so perilous, so fraught with starvation and disease, that out of over 260 men who set out, only 18 returned. It really makes you appreciate your cozy bed, doesn't it? Mercator's projection, creating a flat map that preserves compass directions globally. You're out there, bobbing on the vast, inky expanse, the gentle creak of timbers beneath your feet a constant lullaby. The year is 1570, and the sea stretches endlessly before you, a liquid highway to, well, you hope to somewhere profitable. Your trusted magnetic compass, that marvel we talked about, points steadfastly north, or at least what it thinks is north. But here's the rub, isn't it? You're trying to follow a straight line across a curved surface. Imagine trying to iron a basketball flat without tearing it. It's simply not going to happen without some serious stretching and squishing, usually in all the wrong places. And if you'd been sailing before Mercator, let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this journey without getting hopelessly lost or running aground on some uncharted island. That's actually just a really big rock. Your maps, the ones painstakingly drawn by cartographers back on solid ground, are a mess of compromises. They try to show the world, this grand sphere, on a flat sheet of parchment, and they inevitably distort something. Either the shapes are wrong, or the distances are wrong, or, most critically for you, the directions are wrong. If you set your compass to sail due east on one of these older maps and kept that heading, you wouldn't actually go in a straight line across the ocean. Instead, you'd slowly, imperceptibly, drift off course, tracing a gentle curve on the globe that would eventually lead you to who knows where. You'd be sailing in circles trying to hit a straight line, like a confused squirrel trying to bury an invisible nut. Then a quiet revolution sailed into view, not on a grand galleon, but on a sheet of paper published just a year before, in 1569. This was the work of Gerardus Mercator, a Flemish geographer and cartographer. He wasn't just drawing maps. He was solving one of the most fundamental problems of oceanic navigation. His genius lay in understanding that for sailors, preserving the angles, the compass bearings was far more important than preserving the true size or shape of landmasses. Think about it. When you look at a Mercator map today, Greenland looks absolutely enormous, almost the size of Africa. You might even chuckle and think, wow, that's a lot of ice cream. In reality, it's much, much smaller. Canada looks vast and stretched, and even your own country might appear wider or narrower than you know it to be. This visual distortion is the trade-off, the secret sauce, if you will, that makes the map work for navigation. Mercator's brilliance was to mathematically stretch the map in the east-west direction as you move away from the equator, counteracting the natural convergence of longitude lines towards the poles on a sphere. The parallels of latitude, instead of getting closer together towards the poles as they do on the globe, become progressively farther apart on his map. What this means for you, the diligent navigator, is profound. On a Mercator map, a line of constant compass bearing, what sailors call a rum line or loxodrome is always a straight line. You can draw a single straight line from your port of departure to your desired destination. Take its bearing with your trusty protractor, a tool that became indispensable with these new maps. Set your compass to that exact reading, and as long as you keep your ship on that constant heading, you will eventually arrive. No more complicated calculations, no more continuously adjusting your course to account for the Earth's curvature. You just draw and go. It was, for its time, the ultimate point A to point B navigation system. This concept, while seemingly simple to us now with our GPS satellites and digital maps, was utterly revolutionary for global exploration and trade. It was a mainstream historical fact that Mercator's projection quickly became the standard for nautical charts, directly enabling the age of sail to truly conquer the high seas. Without it, the voyages of exploration that followed would have been far more perilous, far less efficient, and perhaps, in many cases, impossible. It was the mathematical backbone for what we talked about in the last section, the global exploration era, allowing those advanced compasses and charts to really sing. There's a quirky tidbit about Mercator himself. He was not only a cartographer, but also a globe maker, an instrument maker, and a calligrapher. He was a true polymath of his age, passionately dedicated to creating accurate representations of the world. He understood the practical needs of navigators, because he was deeply immersed in the world of instruments and exploration. He even coined the term atlas for a collection of maps, naming it after the mythical Titan Atlas who held up the heavens. So every time you open an atlas today, you're giving a little nod to Mercator's foresight, even if the maps inside aren't always his projection. Now, historians still argue whether Mercator fully grasped the intricate mathematical implications of his projection beyond its practical utility, or if he arrived at it more through empirical trial and error, a brilliant intuition guided by the needs of sailors. Was it a stroke of pure mathematical genius, or a clever, iterative solution to a pressing problem? The debate continues, reflecting the enduring complexity behind what seems, at first glance, like a simple rectangular map. Yet, despite its navigational brilliance, the Mercator projection has its limitations. Because it stretches landmasses so dramatically near the poles, it gives a visually skewed sense of the world's true proportions. Countries nearer the equator appear smaller than they are, while those farther north or south appear inflated. This visual bias, some argue, has subtly influenced our geopolitical perceptions for centuries, placing Europe and North America visually larger and more central than their actual land area might suggest. But for you, the sailor, squinting at your compass and the vast ocean, these philosophical debates are far from your mind. You simply appreciate that you can now draw a straight line on a piece of paper, set your course, and trust that if you hold true, you'll reach your destination. Today, you just tap a screen, and a disembodied voice tells you to turn left in 50 meters. No giant paper maps required, thankfully, or your car would need its own cartographer, wouldn't it? You feel the deck roll beneath your feet, a gentle, rhythmic sway that has been your constant companion for weeks, perhaps months. The salt spray kisses your face, cool and bracing, as the wind whips through the rigging, a symphony of groans and creaks. All around you the ocean stretches, an endless, shimmering expanse of cerulean blue that merges indistinguishably with the horizon. You gaze out, squinting against the bright sun, a tiny speck on an immeasurably vast canvas. Above, the sun arches, just as it has every day since you left port, a golden orb tracing its familiar path. You know with relative certainty your latitude, how far north or south you are from the equator. You can calculate it with impressive precision by observing the sun's height at noon, or by measuring the angle of the North Star above the horizon, just as those ancient stargazers did long before your time. That much you've mastered. But as you turn your gaze forward, towards the shimmering, unknowable expanse of your destination, a knot tightens in your stomach. East or west? That, my friend, is the riddle that has plagued mariners for millennia, a silent, deadly question echoing across the waves. You see, while latitude was a straightforward celestial geometry problem, longitude was, well, it was a different beast entirely. Imagine trying to find a specific blade of grass in an infinite field, blindfolded, with only the sound of a distant, intermittent whisper to guide you. That's what navigating east or west on the open ocean felt like. The smallest miscalculation, the slightest error, could mean missing your target by hundreds of miles, leading your ship onto treacherous shoals, or simply into the vast, lonely void of the unknown, where you probably won't survive this, by the way. Your ship, your crew, your precious cargo, all at the mercy of an invisible, unquantifiable line. For centuries, clever minds had grappled with this problem. Some tried observing the eclipses of Jupiter's moons, a method that worked beautifully on land but was utterly useless on a pitching deck. Can you imagine trying to steady a telescope enough to watch tiny? Distant moons disappear and reappear, while waves the size of small houses are trying to reacquaint you with your lunch. Others develop the lunar distance method, where you'd measure the angle between the moon and certain stars. This was incredibly complex, requiring precise tables, skilled navigators, and a brain that could process trigonometry faster than a modern supercomputer on paper, with a quill in the middle of a storm. It was accurate, yes, but monumentally difficult and time-consuming at sea. The need for a simple, reliable solution became so critical that in 1714, the British Parliament, recognizing the colossal losses of ships and lives, passed the Longitude Act, offering a staggering prize of £20,000, an astronomical sum, equivalent to millions today to anyone who could devise a practical method for determining longitude at sea within half a degree of accuracy. This was a mainstream historical fact, a grand challenge thrown down to the brightest minds of an era. And then, a quiet genius emerged from the unlikeliest of places, a self-taught clockmaker named John Harrison. He wasn't a scholar, not an astronomer, nor a polished academic. He was a craftsman, a man who worked with gears and springs and the meticulous art of keeping time. He understood something fundamental that many astronomers of his day overlooked. If you could know the precise time at your departure point, say Greenwich, England, and compare it to the precise local time wherever you were at sea, you could calculate your longitude. Every hour's difference in time equated to 15 degrees of longitude. If it was noon on your ship, and your special clock read 3 p.m. Greenwich time, you were 3 hours west of Greenwich, or 45 degrees west longitude. Simple, right? The challenge was building a clock that could withstand the constant motion of a ship, the extreme temperature changes, the humidity, and still keep time with incredible accuracy for months on end. Harrison dedicated his life to this pursuit, often to the detriment of his family and reputation. He wasn't just building clocks. He was inventing an entirely new kind of timekeeping, pushing the boundaries of mechanical precision. He developed bimetallic strips to compensate for temperature changes, new escapements to reduce friction, and special balances that were unaffected by the ship's motion. His masterpiece, the H4, was a compact, almost pocket watch-sized marvel, exquisitely crafted from brass and steel. When it finally underwent sea trials, the results were astonishing. On a voyage to Jamaica, Harrison's son William used H4 to predict the ship's position with such accuracy that they sighted land exactly when expected, after weeks at sea. This was a stark contrast to previous voyages, where ships often drifted dangerously off course, relying on a prayer and the occasional sighting of land, if they were lucky. Yet, despite this undeniable success, Harrison faced enormous skepticism and outright hostility from the Board of Longitude, largely comprised of established astronomers who preferred their complex celestial calculations. They simply couldn't fathom that a simple mechanical device could outperform their sophisticated astronomical observations. Historians still argue whether the resistance Harrison faced was purely scientific conservatism, or also fueled by professional jealousy from the astronomical community, who saw their intellectual domain threatened by a mere clockmaker. It's a bit like inventing a self-driving car and having all the professional horse trainers refuse to believe it could work, insisting on the superior intuition of a well-bred stallion. But it just tells time, they seem to scoff, struggling to grasp the revolutionary implications. It took decades, and eventually the direct intervention of King George III, for Harrison to finally receive the bulk of his prize money, a testament to his sheer stubbornness and unwavering belief in his invention. Once the chronometer's accuracy was undeniably proven, its impact was nothing short of revolutionary. Suddenly, mariners could fix their position with unprecedented precision, reducing journey times, opening up new trade routes, and vastly improving safety at sea. You no longer had to hug coastlines or guess your way across vast oceans. This invention, a triumph of human ingenuity and persistence, didn't just solve the age-old east-west problem. It unlocked the entire globe. It paved the way for more accurate mapping, enabled truly global exploration, and fundamentally changed how humanity understood its place on a spherical Earth, where every degree of longitude, now measurable, pulled the world a little closer together. The humble ticking of a precise clock had, in essence, shrunk the planet, transforming boundless oceans into navigable highways. You float, or rather, your tiny wooden vessel bobs precariously, somewhere in the vast, inky expanse of the Atlantic. The stars are obscured, a thick blanket of cloud pressing down on your small world. You check the chronometer again, that magnificent, ticking marvel that finally, gloriously solved the riddle of longitude, allowing you to pinpoint your east-west position with unprecedented accuracy. You know where you are, north and south, east and west. Or do you? You glance at the compass, its needle a trusted friend, always pointing to the north, or so you thought. But lately, something feels off. It's a subtle pull, a whisper of a shift that defies the very certainty it promises. You feel it in your bones, that unsettling lurch in your gut that says your true north, the one your maps are built upon, isn't quite where your compass thinks it is. And here's a cheeky little reality check for you. Get this wrong over hundreds or thousands of miles, and you probably won't survive this. Your little wooden bauble will become a permanent, uncharted reef. Good luck explaining that to the mermaids. This isn't a problem of faulty equipment or a sleepy navigator. This is something far more fundamental, a secret the Earth itself had kept hidden for millennia. A subtle but profound distinction between true north, the fixed, immutable point at the top of the globe where all lines of longitude converge, and magnetic north, the wandering, shifting spot where your compass needle actually wants to point. This difference, this quiet rebellion of the magnetic field against the geographic pole, is what we call magnetic variation or magnetic declination, and its unveiling would add yet another layer of complexity, and indeed another layer of precision to the art of finding your way. For centuries, the lodestone, that mystical stone that pointed consistently northward, was enough. Early sailors simply trusted it, assuming it pointed to the real north. And for short coastal hops, or even cross-sea journeys within a relatively small magnetic anomaly, it mostly worked. But as those intrepid explorers, bolstered by innovations like the chronometer and Mercator's brilliant projections, stretched their sails across entire oceans, across continents, they started to notice the discrepancies. One of the earliest and most famous observations of this magnetic peculiarity belongs to none other than Christopher Columbus himself. On his very first voyage across the Atlantic in 1492, as he sailed further west, his crew grew increasingly agitated. Why? Because the compass needle, their steadfast guide, was slowly but undeniably shifting its alignment, deviating from Polaris, the North Star. To them, it seemed the very laws of nature were breaking down. Columbus, ever the quick thinker, or perhaps just lucky, managed to calm their fears by inventing a convenient, if entirely bogus, explanation about the North Star itself moving. Mainstream historical fact alert. His records clearly show he was among the first European navigators to systematically observe and document magnetic variation on such a grand scale. He wasn't the first to see it, but he helped solidify its importance. The scientific understanding of why this was happening would take a bit longer to crystallize. Imagine trying to explain to a superstitious 15th century sailor that their trusty compass wasn't broken, but rather, the entire planet was acting like a giant, slightly wonky bar magnet. It sounds like something out of a bad sci-fi movie, doesn't it? But that's precisely what the English physician and natural philosopher William Gilbert proposed in his monumental 1600 treatise, De Magnete. Gilbert, often dubbed the father of magnetism, systematically experimented with magnets and iron spheres, demonstrating that the Earth itself was a massive magnet. He explained that the compass needle pointed to the Earth's magnetic poles, which, inconveniently for navigators, were not perfectly aligned with the geographic poles, the true north and south poles, where the Earth's axis of rotation emerges. And to make matters even more interesting, he also posited that these magnetic poles weren't even fixed. They wandered. They still do, by the way. Your magnetic North Pole is currently off cavorting somewhere in the Canadian Arctic, moving at a pretty brisk clip. It's like a cosmic game of hide-and-seek, but with your navigation on the line. This discovery was revolutionary, but it also presented a new challenge. If magnetic north wasn't true north, and if the difference varied from place to place across the globe, how were navigators supposed to compensate? The answer lay in careful, laborious observation and the creation of new kinds of charts. Navigators began to map lines of equal magnetic declination, known as isogonic lines. You might think, oh, just add or subtract a few degrees, no big deal. But the values change, not just with location, but with time, because the Earth's magnetic field is constantly shifting due to complex processes within its molten core. It's not just a lazy river. It's more like a very slow, very large, and very unpredictable washing machine cycle. This led to the need for variation charts, which showed the declination for different parts of the world. Sailors would have to consult these charts, find their approximate location, and then adjust their compass bearings accordingly to get a true direction. It was a bit like trying to navigate with a map that keeps subtly changing its scale, and you have to consult another map to figure out how much it's changed. No wonder the rum rations were so generous. A quirky tidbit from this era involves early attempts to use magnetic variation itself as a means of determining longitude. You see, if you could precisely map the lines of equal magnetic declination, and these lines had a distinct, predictable pattern that varied significantly with longitude, then theoretically, by measuring your current magnetic variation, you could determine your east-west position. This was a particularly appealing idea to astronomers and navigators before the advent of the chronometer, as it didn't rely on precise timekeeping or celestial observations. For a while, there was serious debate and effort put into creating magnetic longitude methods. Unfortunately, the magnetic field proved far too irregular and unpredictable for this to be a reliable solution, especially over long distances. The Earth, it seems, enjoys its little magnetic mysteries. Historians still argue whether early navigators, like Columbus, truly understood the implications of magnetic variation, or just observed it as a peculiar anomaly that required an ad hoc explanation to keep their crews from mutinying. Was it a scientific insight, or simply a pragmatic solution to a strange phenomenon? Regardless, the systematic study and mapping of magnetic variation became an indispensable part of navigation, a testament to humanity's persistent quest to master the directions of our world, one subtle deviation at a time. You stand on a windswept ridge, your breath fogging in the crisp air. Below, the world sprawls out, a tapestry of fields, forests, and distant towns. For centuries, you've relied on the sun's arc, the steadfast stars, the feel of the wind, or the pull of a magnetic needle to orient yourself, to find north, south, east, and west. But now, as society grows more complex, as land ownership becomes paramount, as engineering projects demand unprecedented accuracy, the old ways feel insufficient. Roughly north isn't cutting it when you're laying out a canal that spans a continent, or when you need to define the exact border between two burgeoning nations. If your livelihood depended on precisely knowing where your land ended and your neighbors began, you probably wouldn't survive this era of guesswork. One wrong mark, and suddenly your prized cow pasture belongs to someone else. The solution, like so many breakthroughs, lies not in gazing further into the heavens, but in anchoring yourself firmly to the earth, wielding the cold, hard logic of geometry. This is where precision surveying truly begins, where the invisible lines of latitude and longitude, so elegantly theorized, become tangible realities etched onto the very landscape. The fundamental concept that transforms all land mapping is triangulation. Imagine a vast, invisible network of triangles spread across the land, each one linked to the next. The brilliance lies in its simplicity. If you know the length of one side of a triangle, a meticulously measured baseline, and you can accurately measure the two angles at either end of that baseline to a third, distant point, then you can precisely calculate the lengths of the other two sides and the third angle. Those newly calculated sides then become the baselines for new triangles, and so on, propagating accuracy across vast distances, connecting points across entire countries with a web of geometric certainty. It's like trying to nail jelly to a tree while blindfolded if you don't have this method. And what marvel of engineering allows you to measure these angles with such breathtaking precision? The theodolite. Before its widespread adoption, angle measurement was a far clumsier affair, relying on large, often unwieldy instruments. But the theodolite, in its various iterations from the 18th century onward, was a game-changer. Imagine a sophisticated blend of a telescope and precisely engraved protractors, all mounted on a sturdy tripod. You look through its eyepiece, sighting onto distant markers, perhaps a custom-built signal tower, a church spire, or even a precisely placed mirror catching the sun. The instrument's horizontal and vertical circles, often made of brass or silver, are engraved with astonishing accuracy, allowing readings down to seconds of arc. To put that in perspective, a single degree is divided into 60 minutes, and each minute into 60 seconds. We're talking about measuring an angle so tiny. It's like splitting a single hair into 3,600 individual strands. The only thing more precise than a perfectly calibrated theodolite is a tax collector looking for a penny. The process of a grand triangulation survey was an epic undertaking, demanding immense patience, skill, and often sheer physical endurance. It would begin with the establishment of a baseline, often several miles long, laid out on the flattest, most open ground available. This baseline would be measured with excruciating accuracy, using specially designed chains or tapes, meticulously corrected for temperature, tension, and even sag. This single measurement was the bedrock of the entire survey. Any error here would ripple through every subsequent calculation. From each end of this baseline, surveyors would set up their theodolites and sight to a distant, intervisible point, often on a hilltop, forming the first, largest triangle. They'd measure the angles from the baseline ends to that peak. Once those angles were locked in, the exact distance to that peak could be calculated. That calculated distance then became a side of the next triangle, from which new angles were measured to a new, even more distant point, and so on. You'd see teams of surveyors, often accompanied by porters to carry the heavy instruments and flags, trekking across rugged terrain, climbing mountains, battling the elements. Sometimes, to achieve the long sightlines necessary for grand triangles, they'd construct elevated platforms, or even use special night signals, bright lamps, or even flashes of gunpowder, to mark points miles away when daytime haze obscured the view. Imagine the poor chap whose job it was to light the gunpowder on a distant peak in the middle of the night. I bet the early surveyors had some amazing leg muscles from carrying all that gear up mountains. Just another day at the office, honey. Only today the office was on top of that impossibly steep, windy peak. This systematic, geometric approach to mapping revolutionized understanding of the Earth's surface. For the first time, highly accurate topographical maps could be produced, showing not just direction and distance, but precise elevation and contours. This was absolutely critical for the Industrial Revolution, for planning and constructing canals, railways, and bridges, for designing fortifications and military strategies, and for the efficient management and taxation of land. The Great Trigonometrical Survey of India, begun in the late 18th century and continuing for decades, stands as one of the most monumental achievements of this era, mapping the entire subcontinent with astonishing precision, and even determining the height of Mount Everest. Historians still argue whether the initial push for these massive national surveys was primarily driven by military strategy and defense, or by economic development and the desire for more efficient taxation and land management. The shift was profound. You were no longer just navigating by instinct or a wavering magnetic whisper. You were now actively defining the world with cold, hard lines and angles, creating a grid of certainty that would underpin everything from personal property deeds to the grand ambitions of global empires. The precision of the theodolite and the elegant power of triangulation marked the true dawn of modern cartography, transforming our understanding of where everything and everyone precisely stood. Satellite navigation age, GPS emerges, providing real-time, highly accurate global positioning. You're drifting, perhaps, through a landscape where the only map is the one you carry in your mind, meticulously etched with every turn, every prominent tree, every winding river. You recall the ancient methods: the sun's arc, the North Star's steady gaze, the prevailing winds whispering secrets of the sea. You've learned how a precise angle from a theodolite could lock down a point on a survey map with breathtaking accuracy, transforming wildlands into orderly grids. But all of that, even with its meticulous precision, was static, a snapshot in time. What if you needed to know not just where a specific landmark was, but where you were right now in the middle of nowhere, with no landmarks in sight and a sky full of clouds? What if you wanted to know your position with an accuracy that would make even the most dedicated Roman road engineer weep with envy, and you needed it instantly? Imagine, for a moment, being completely disoriented, dropped into a vast, featureless desert 2 centuries ago with only a magnetic compass and the faint hope of a distant mountain range. Let's be real, you probably won't survive this. Our ancestors had it tough, relying on skills and observations that we, in our modern convenience, can barely fathom. But humanity, ever restless, kept pushing the boundaries of knowing where. And this relentless curiosity, coupled with some truly staggering technological leaps, brought us to a point where knowing your precise location on Earth became not just possible, but effortlessly ubiquitous. The seeds of this modern marvel weren't planted in a desire for easier road trips or finding the nearest coffee shop, but in the chilly winds of the Cold War. In the late 1960s and early 70s, the U.S. Department of Defense began conceptualizing a system so revolutionary it would redefine navigation. The Global Positioning System, or GPS. The core idea was elegant in its simplicity, yet mind-boggling in its execution. Create a network of satellites orbiting Earth, each constantly broadcasting a signal. A receiver on the ground would then pick up these signals, calculate its distance from multiple satellites, and poof, pinpoint its exact location anywhere on the planet. The very first experimental satellite, Navstar 1, soared into orbit in 1978, a silent harbinger of a navigational future few could have imagined. This was, first and foremost, a military project, designed to give the U.S. Armed Forces an unparalleled advantage in navigation, targeting, and coordination, regardless of terrain or visibility. Now, how does this magic actually work? Picture a celestial ballet of satellites, each a tiny, highly advanced messenger, hurtling around our planet at speeds of thousands of miles per hour. Each one carries an atomic clock, ticking with an accuracy so profound it makes your watch look like a sundial in comparison. These satellites continuously broadcast signals, essentially time-stamped radio messages. Your humble GPS receiver, whether it's the dedicated unit in your car, the chip in your smartphone, or even a tiny module in a drone, sniffs out these signals from at least 4 different satellites. It then measures the infinitesimally tiny time difference it takes for each signal to reach it. Since radio waves travel at a known, constant speed, the speed of light, no less, the receiver can calculate its exact distance from each satellite. Think of it like this. If you know you're 10 miles from City A, 15 miles from City B, and 20 miles from City C, you can pretty accurately figure out where you are on a map. With satellites, it's trilateration in 3 dimensions. You need signals from at least 4 satellites to get truly accurate X, Y, and Z coordinates, plus to account for any minuscule timing errors in your own receiver. It's like having an invisible committee of hyper-accurate timekeepers in space, all conspiring to tell you precisely where you stand on the Earth's surface. For a long time, though, this incredible precision wasn't fully available to you, the everyday civilian. The Pentagon, in a somewhat understandable fit of paranoia, implemented something called selective availability. This was a deliberate degradation of the public GPS signal, introducing a random error of up to 100 meters. So, while the military knew exactly where they were, you might find your car icon on the navigation screen seemingly driving across a lake or through a building, only for you to realize you were perfectly safe on the road. It was like ordering a gourmet meal and only getting half the ingredients. It worked, but it wasn't quite right. That all changed on May 1, 2000, when President Bill Clinton ordered selective availability to be turned off. Overnight, civilian GPS accuracy leaped tenfold. Suddenly, everyone had the same pinpoint precision the military had enjoyed. It was akin to finally getting the full bag of chips you paid for, instead of a bag full of air and a few crumbs. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for ending selective availability was purely economic. to boost the burgeoning commercial GPS industry and enable new technologies, or a more strategic move to encourage global reliance on the system, making it indispensable and thus harder for potential adversaries to ignore or disrupt. Regardless of the precise reasoning, this moment truly uncorked the genie of the satellite navigation age for the masses. Think about it. Ride-sharing apps, food delivery services that know exactly where your pizza is, precision agriculture where tractors can plant seeds within millimeters of accuracy, drones navigating complex flight paths, emergency services pinpointing your location during a crisis, even scientists tracking tectonic plate shifts and predicting earthquake zones. All of it, every single bit, rests on the silent, unwavering signals from those satellites. It has become so ingrained, so utterly expected, that we barely give it a second thought. You pull out your phone to find the fastest route to work, track your morning run, or discover the nearest highly rated taco truck. It's like having an invisible, omniscient guide constantly whispering your place in the universe, updating your exact spot every second. Remember how our earliest ancestors looked to the sun and stars for direction, always needing a clear line of sight, always at the mercy of the weather. Now you can be deep inside a city canyon, obscured by dense cloud cover, or even underground in a tunnel, for a moment anyway, and that faint whisper from a satellite 12,000 miles above still finds you, connecting you to the global grid. It's truly a testament to human ingenuity, taking us from casting shadows on a stick to catching signals from space, all to answer that one fundamental ancient question. Where am I? Future direction sense? AI and augmented reality reshape our intuitive understanding of space. You're walking through a bustling city square, but your gaze isn't fixed on the glowing screen in your hand. Instead, a shimmering overlay appears directly on the world before your eyes. A translucent arrow points down a side street. A digital label hovers above a cafe telling you its star rating. And a gentle chime guides your steps, subtly nudging you left, then right. This isn't a sci-fi movie. This is your everyday. The very air around you is intelligent, responsive, guiding you with an almost psychic understanding of your needs. Your own sense of north, south, east, and west. It's still there, of course, a primal instinct, but it's increasingly augmented, enhanced, perhaps even supplanted by an external, omnipresent intelligence. And let's be honest, without this digital guardian angel whispering sweet nothings about turn-by-turn directions, you probably wouldn't survive navigating a new airport terminal, let alone a new continent. We've grown reliant. This isn't just about getting from point A to point B anymore. It's about understanding the why and the how of movement on an entirely new level. Your AI isn't merely charting the fastest route. It's factoring in pedestrian traffic, the likelihood of a charming street performer, your current mood, and even, perhaps, the most aesthetically pleasing sequence of historical buildings. It's a bit like having a perpetually over-caffeinated tour guide living in your retinas, only without the awkward silences or the insistent demands for tips. The first tentative steps into this augmented directional reality weren't always graceful. Remember those clunky, rather dorky early attempts at augmented reality glasses? Yes, you're picturing them now, aren't you? Those prototypes, which, let's be frank, made you look like you were perpetually trying to adjust invisible spectacles, were far from the seamless interfaces we now take for granted. Yet they were the mainstream historical fact that fundamentally shifted the paradigm. They were our digital compasses, our virtual sextants, overlaying data directly onto the world. No longer did you need to glance down at a map. The map was the world, or at least, a highly personalized, intelligent layer upon it. Your internal GPS, that intuitive sense of which way is up, down, left, or right, was now being fed a constant stream of highly curated, context-aware information. And as for quirks, some early, rather ambitious research even explored the idea of sensory augmentation, where certain haptic feedback devices, worn on the wrist or in shoes, could create subtle vibrations to tell you north without you even needing to look. Imagine a constant, gentle hum on your left ankle telling you that's the way to the pole. Bit weird, right? And probably led to a lot of confused dancing in public squares as people tried to interpret their newfound vibrational wisdom. Is that north, or just my smart sock telling me it needs charging again? It certainly wasn't as intuitive as the sun, or the stars, or even a simple compass, but it underscored humanity's endless quest to externalize and enhance our directional faculties. This blurring of the lines between our innate sense of direction and the AI-driven augmentation is fascinating, isn't it? It leads to questions that linger like a faint echo from ancient philosophical debates. Historians still argue whether the initial push for pervasive AR navigation was driven by genuine societal need, or simply a desire by tech giants to further monetize our every movement and decision. Was it truly about convenience, or about the subtle reshaping of our spatial cognition, making us less reliant on our own internal compass and more dependent on the digital one? There's no easy answer, of course, just a quiet murmur in the scholarly halls. You see, for millennia, finding your way was an active, engaged process. You observed, you memorized, you inferred. You learned the language of the landscape, the sky, the currents. Now much of that heavy lifting is outsourced. Your internal compass, the one that used to spin wildly when you first stepped into a new city, is now mostly just a quiet background hum, occasionally checked against the certainty presented by your augmented reality overlay. We've become incredible at following directions, perhaps at the expense of truly knowing them. Remember when you actually had to know where north was without a digital arrow practically yelling at you? What quaint, ancient times those were. It's almost as if we've perfected navigation to the point where the art of it has become unnecessary. The journey, once a spatial puzzle, is now a guided tour, meticulously planned, optimized, and presented. From the grand, sweeping arcs of celestial navigation to the minute, pixel-perfect placement of an AR arrow, humanity's drive to know where has never wavered. Only the tools, and perhaps our very relationship with them, have transformed beyond recognition. As you drift now, let your own internal compass settle, quiet and at peace. The vast distances we've journeyed together, through scorching deserts and over boundless oceans, have led us here to this quiet moment of understanding. Feel the gentle pull of gravity, the stillness of the air around you, and let your mind release the need for maps or glowing arrows. All those ancient wanderers, the sun-gazers and star-readers, the sailors and the surveyors, they each sought to master their place in the world, to extend their reach into the unknown. And in doing so, they also etched something enduring into the very fabric of human consciousness, a deep-seated impulse to explore, to connect, to simply know where we are. There is no more need to search, no more urgency to orient yourself in the vastness. Just breathe, slowly and deeply, letting the echoes of those distant journeys soften and fade into the quiet comfort of your own space. The grand adventure of finding north, south, east, and west has unfolded over countless ages, each discovery a thread in the rich tapestry of human ingenuity. And now you are safely home, enveloped in the quiet stillness that follows a long and wonderful story. Let your thoughts unwind, like a gentle stream flowing towards a tranquil lake, carrying away any lingering worries or questions. The world is vast and full of wonder, but for now, your world is soft and still. Close your eyes and let yourself float on the very edge of peaceful sleep, knowing that the directions you seek are always, ultimately, within you. All is calm, all is quiet, sweet dreams.